Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the council meeting. And the first item on the agenda is going to be apologies for absence. If I can call on Mr. Hugh Evans, please.
Thank you, Presiding Member. I have apologies from Councillors Paxton Hood-Williams, Linda James, Lyndon Jones, Richard Lewis, Francesca O'Brien, Graham Thomas and Will Thomas. Are there any others? Any others? No? Okay.
Okay, the next item is going to be the disclosure of personal and prejudicial interests, and I'd like to call on Deb Smith to offer advice, please.
Thank you, Presiding Member. I've sent an email to all councillors highlighting some potential interests at today's meeting. I'll just deal with those agenda items which I think are most relevant today. Agenda item 8 and 9, the medium-term financial plan and revenue budget. As you know, these are high-level financial reports which may contain a number of personal interests, and I've asked members to consider the code as far as it affects the business before you in those agenda items. So if the decision affects any business or employment carried on by you, any body to which you've been elected, or your well-being or financial position of yourself or a close personal associate, then you need to declare an interest, particularly for these items. If you're a member of a body referred to in the reports and you've been appointed by the council, then it will be a personal interest only. Agenda item 10, that's the housing revenue account. If you hold a council tenancy, you should declare a personal interest only. Agenda item 11, that's the capital budget and programme. Again, this is a high-level report which might contain a number of personal interests. And again, I ask you to consider the same elements of the code there. If you're a school governor appointed by the LEA in one of the schools mentioned in this report, then you'll need to declare a personal interest only. And finally, the agenda item number 12, that's the housing revenue account. Again, if you hold a council tenancy, then you should declare a personal interest only. Those are the main agenda items, but if anybody has an interest in any other items on the agenda, then you can declare as well. And please remember to fill out the form. So with agenda item 8 and 9, I think we're looking at members of bodies first. I think we have some, if you want to declare a personal interest for a membership of an outside body.
Higher authority.
Yeah. Got those there. Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 10, the housing revenue account. Anyone holding council tenancy? Thank you. Mr. Hennigan.
Item 10, housing revenue, and item 12, and I'm a member of the Fire Authority as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item number 11, the capital budget. Again, I think the main item here will be if you're a school governor appointed by the LEA on one of the schools named in the report. Thank you. And similarly, agenda item number 12 with the council tenancy, I'm assuming those who've declared an interest in 10 will also be declaring an interest in 12. Yeah. Thank you. Any other interest in any other items on the agenda? Sam?
Agenda item 11, I work for the University of Wales Trinity St David.
Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, I actually have an interest in question 4 on councillors' questions in that my business in receipt of the basic payment scheme and move into the sustainable farmer scheme.
Thank you. Just remind you all to fill in the forms, okay? Thank you very much. Oh. Hale.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know whether this should be included. I'm a member of the Kilvay Soul Group who oppose some of the funding arrangements for Skyline. Should I? Is that an interest? Is it a personal
I'm sorry,
interest?
Councillor Hale, I couldn't actually hear what you were saying in relation to your membership.
Yeah, I'm a member of the Kilvay Soul Group, which is a community group in St Thomas, which opposes the funding the public funding of Skyline?
Then I think, Councillor Hill, in relation to that particular interest, yes, that would be a personal and prejudicial interest. And I think Skyline appears in a number of reports, and certainly the councillor questions as well. So you need to identify those items where there is reference to Skyline and withdraw from
Should
the
I
meeting.
stay? Should I and withdraw?
No.
Okay.
Personal and prejudicial, you'll need to leave the meeting with when there's any consideration of an agenda item which touches upon Skyline.
Okay. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Councillor William.
Yeah, sorry, I am a member on the Facebook page of that group. So does that make?
Again, it depends to the extent to which you are aligned with that particular group and whether then it becomes a well-being interest for you, whether any decision on Skyline impacts your well-being or that of a close personal associate. So it would be the nature of your affiliation would be relevant.
Yeah, I declare a personal and prejudicial interest. No, personal, sorry, personal interest.
If it's personal only, you can remain.
Okay, I don't think there's anybody else. Okay, the next item is item 3, and that's the minutes, and that's to approve and sign the minutes, and they're on pages 1 through to 8, so I'll go through them one at a time. So page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay. Okay, thank you. The next item is the written responses to questions asked at the last ordinary meeting of council, and they are on pages 9 through to 11. And the next item is the announcements of the presiding member. Unfortunately, I have to start with condolences. It's with sadness that I refer to the death of Beverly Smith, the father of Councillor Robert Smith. Councillor Smith and his family would like to thank councillors from all sides of the chamber and officers for their kind wishes at this sad time. So can I ask you please to stand as a mark of sympathy and respect? Okay, thank you. The next item is the announcements of the leader. Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, thank you, Presiding Member. 3 announcements this evening. Firstly, my thanks to all the members that have worn purple this evening in respect of the forthcoming International Women's Day on Friday. Should we agree the item tonight, then you'll all be invited to a naming ceremony over in the park on Friday to recognise Amy Dilwyn, and I'm sure Councillor Gibbard will say a bit more about that later on. But again, my thanks to all who've been involved in getting that sorted so quickly. Also, today I had the pleasure of attending a venue in the city and welcoming Gordon Brown and the First Minister. It was the formal opening of what is termed Cwtch Mawr. It is a multi-bank, and for those of you not familiar with the concept of a multi-bank, it is like a food bank, but it is backed by companies like Amazon and others, and they provide not only the technical know-how to manage stock control and logistics, but they're also providing goods free of charge, which can be distributed to those in need. So in the way that the food banks work, this will provide household goods, sanitary products, toiletries, coats, clothing. It's an absolutely fantastic facility. In due course, the rollout of those who can refer to the multi-bank will be progressed, and that will include councillors who will be able to refer members of their community in who may need items and help. The facility itself is headed up by a charity because that's the model that is required, and Faith in Families and Sherry Berger are leading that. And I've got to say that they've done an amazing job working together with Swansea Voluntary Services. Councillor Alison Anthony and Jane Whitmore have been leading from a council perspective in terms of getting this facility up and running. And I think we'd already, as of today, distributed over 70,000 items in terms of the soft launch to over 7,000 families in need across Swansea. So again, I'm sure we'd all like to see a country where food banks and multi-banks weren't needed. However, the reality is that we have very, very high levels of poverty in some areas of this city and of the country, and therefore the multi-bank will be an amazing facility to help those in need. So again, my thanks to everybody who's been involved in that. My final item tonight is to welcome 3 individuals who are with us in the public gallery this evening: Henry Gilbert, Simon Tucker and Peter Harris. For those of you not familiar, we were recognised recently as the UK's first defibrillator-friendly city. And Henry, Simon and Peter have been working tirelessly alongside the council to install over 450 publicly accessible defibrillators, as well as some 200 that are behind doors where they're only accessible at certain times of day, but certainly 450. So I believe there's another set of defibrillators already due to be installed, and they have already saved a number of lives in Swansea. I know councillors have used their community budgets as well to do this, and it is something that we hope the rest of Wales will follow us on. I am lobbying WLGA colleagues and leaders to do what Swansea has done. And my special thanks also go to Councillor Andrea Lewis, who has championed this initiative in the council and worked closely with Henry and the team to get this out. I think it is a small amount of money that we've provided as a council in the overall scheme of a £900 million budget, but I don't know what price you can put on saving the life of a loved one, because this potentially buys time to keep people alive until the paramedics arrive. So again, very grateful to all of them. And can we give Henry and the team a round of applause, please?
Okay, we have got a lovely award here. It's a little bit heavy, I don't want to drop it. Okay, and also the okay. Right, the next item is public questions. There are a number of questions come in, but can I remind you, we've only got 10 minutes for public questions. So if you want to get your question heard, please be as brief as you can and get straight to the point and not preamble a little bit. Okay, so the first one is from, I believe, Mr. Thraves, Alex Thraves. Thank you.
Well, good evening, comrades, colleagues and officers. I'm Alex Race from the Socialist Party and Swansea Trades Council. It's been 13 years we protested about the council cuts that have been taking place, and it's true to say we come into a cliff edge, and that's not me saying that. That's the headmasters in Swansea, the school forum, which has said that next year schools in Swansea will be coming towards a cliff edge. Now, that's yet again a controlled Labour council is proposing once more huge cuts in Swansea for 2024-25, almost £25 million worth of cuts and service cost increases, which will be inflicted on the residents of Swansea, along with a likely above inflation council tax increase. Now, this follows decades, almost a decade and a bit, of more Labour council cuts being implemented, starting with the Tories in Westminster, passed down by the Welsh-led Labour government and imposed then by Swansea City Council. Now, the Sustainable Swansea Strategy...
Don't want to interrupt you, Mr. Hayes, but can you ask a question,
I've just come to the question,
Thank you.
a minor preamble. In 2013, which started in 2013, and the recent transformation plan has resulted in £130 million worth of cuts in those years, which has had a huge negative impact and has resulted in a huge cut in our local public services and quality of life. So my blunt question is, when will Swansea Labour councillors stop administering Tory cuts and start defending the residents of Swansea by setting a legal no-cuts budget at the start of a campaign for increased funding from the Senedd and Westminster? And I say a legal budget because I know the leader of the council will come back and say we can't implement an illegal budget. Well, a one-off budget in order to prepare and campaign with the unions, with other Labour councils for fight for the resources is what's necessary. So a one-off legal budget should be the strategy of Swansea Council.
Can I call on the leader, please? Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, thank you, Presiding Member. And again, thanks to Mr. Threaves. Whilst we disagree, he does at least take the time to read the budget papers and turn up every year to ask a question, which is appreciated. I think there are a couple of areas where we differ greatly and a couple of things I would like to correct. So if Mr. Threaves wants to stay for the budget presentation, he'll see exactly how some of the figures he's quoted are not correct today, because whilst he talks about 20 million plus of cuts, the actual final budget position is a net increase in funding of £40 million going into services after everything else has been considered. So there's actually an increase in the budget, not a cut. Also, you could set a legal no-cuts budget. You could do that. But as you said, you didn't want the council tax increased. Well, you could do it by raising council tax to 31%. That would be what a legal no-cuts budget would cost in a single year. We are deploying significant amounts of reserves this year, over £7 million of reserves into education to help education this year, because the cliff edge would have been here this year. The talk of cliff edge is because we have no 3-year spending plan from the Tory UK government, so you have nothing on which to base future projections. Therefore, you have no guarantee of money in next year, the year after, the year after. That creates automatically a cliff edge in funding. The other thing I would say is, in terms of the £130 million worth of cuts that you mentioned over the period of austerity, we have not delivered £130 million of the cuts. What you're referring to were the proposals within the medium-term financial plan. And as has been explained a number of times, that plan is a mere projection. It is a scenario-based document looking at what could happen. In every year where those cuts were proposed, we actually came out with a much better position. So there was nowhere near £130 million worth of cuts made. But I do agree with you. It's time for a change of government, Mr. Threaves, absolutely. The Tories need to be gone, especially after today's damp squib of a budget, which provided simply no new money. And again, I want to see the end of austerity. We know that the austerity was an invention by the coalition government, Lib Dem and Tory working together to remove money from people and from services. That has to end. We need a Labour government as soon as possible. Mr. Threaves, if you read the documents, the updated documents, you will see there's a £40 million investment in services. That is a factual matter.
Excuse me, Mr. Threaves, you've had your answer. Thank you very much. Can I call on Mr. Dave Warren, please?
Thanks very much. My question relates to the revenue budget, which I think is item 9, and I'm asking the question on behalf of Swansea Trades Council, which is the body that coordinates the trade union branches in the Swansea area. And my question is that despite your claim that you're not making £25 million worth of cuts, but are actually making a net increase to the budget, yet you are still proposing a loss of 28 full-time equivalent posts and an unquantified number of posts in schools on top of that. And my question is, have you considered what effect the loss of those posts are going to have on the provision of public services to the people of Swansea?
Thank you, Mr. Warren.
Yeah,
Leader.
again, thank you, Mr. Warren, for that one. It's only looking at part of the equation. So you also have to consider that of the £900 million budget, only £500 million worth of it is the core budget, which is where you'll be seeing the proposal to delete 28 full-time equivalent posts. But as the document makes clear, of those 28 posts, 14 were already vacant, and we've had a number of volunteers come forward for early voluntary severance. So we're pretty confident that there will be no compulsory job losses from the core council this year. In terms of schools, as I said in response to Mr. Thraves, we've provided, rather than the £4.5 million, I think that was, or £4.9 million that was expected as part of the Welsh Government settlement, we've increased that through the use of reserves and by deploying some other measures. And now we anticipate over £17 million going into schools this year, which has provided some welcome relief to schools. It doesn't relieve all of the pressures, but governors and heads and governing bodies will need to now decide how best to manage given the additional resources we've provided. Schools will make their own decisions in terms of the structures. We have no powers directly as a council to tell schools how they should be structured. That is a matter for the head and the governing body. But what we have tried to do is to provide significant additional resources by deploying entire reserves that we had into schools this year. But we can't give a guarantee for next year at this point, because we don't know what the funding position is from both the UK and Welsh Government. That is why there is a potential cliff edge. But what we have done is to make sure the cliff edge doesn't occur this year.
Okay, thank you. And the next one is from Mr. Ben Houghton, please. Can I just remind you, Mr. Houghton, we've just got 5 minutes. I will give you an extra couple of minutes, but I'm not going to give you too many. Okay?
Oh, thank you. So I echoing the points of next year, there's a cliff edge and all these things, and the loans not coming through and possibly affecting the budgets, I imagine, for projects that are currently failing. I'll go straight to the point. That I'm here about Skyline and the finance being put to Skyline. Considering the significant, so this is question 2 in your briefing, but considering the significant public funds at risk for Skyline's enterprise and their history and reluctance to repay government funds, as evidence in decision to not return £7.9 million of wages subsidy in a report on the 27th of August 2021 in Artigo Daily Times, can the council elucidate the specific financial safeguards, accountability measures that have been enacted to protect the investment against potential underperformance and the failure of Skyline Swansea project? www.odt.co.New Zealand, as evidence of some current projects that are failing, that have loans that will become debtable to us. That is very important to consider. Question 2, which is actually question 4 in your sheet. How does the investment to Skyline directly justify prioritising 5.2 million towards the new Swansea Vale car park and ride facility in alignment to strategic priorities and the needs of Swansea's community, particularly considering the parks and green spaces have been highlighted in your revenue budget for tax increases at 42% positive for investment, and in the budget consultation results that leisure and cultural facilities are as low as 28%. So green spaces should be protected. Again, why are we putting this money in? Why are we moving the park and ride for 5.2 million on top of the other money. So I'm shaking. Another point would be, in light of the answer, this is question 5, which is question 5 in your sheet. In light of the answers in the questions of 85,000 spent of the nominal amount of 43,000 set aside of the acquisition purpose of Skyline's behalf, will a large part of that be put aside to the NRW lease relinquishment of 999 years, which with the financial implications of surrendering this lease will be placed the maintenance burden on the council, again, us, the public? I think I'll leave the other questions. Thank you.
Peter?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to Mr. Houghton for sight of the list of questions prior to the meeting. However, Mr. Houghton will be aware that he revised the questions shortly before the meeting. His verbal, understood. Understood. So the verbal questions have been asked differ again from the ones that I have been provided with. So what I propose to do is, in broad terms on question 1, whilst the specifics of that arrangement remain commercially confidential, again, within that, the council will be making all efforts to ensure that there are safeguards in terms of the legal and financial arrangements with Skyline. And I would repeat that any monies that the council does seek to invest alongside the Welsh Government, the council's element will be fully repayable. So that's the first bit. The second bit, in terms of the park and ride, again, we have a park and ride strategy for the city. We are still keen to deliver a park and ride in the west, although the availability of usable and suitable space has proved a challenge. And again, in terms of our park and ride options, we have recently undertaken a consultation and do seek to establish a bigger park and ride, not least to support the stadium and obviously the transport issues that the stadium has, because it needs to create a new transport plan. And on the third part around NRW, again, those arrangements remain commercially confidential. But what I will commit to do, we will provide Mr. Houghton with a written response to each of the 7 questions, I think it was, that he submitted from this. And where we're unable to answer due to commercial confidentiality, we will make that. Yeah. So. Absolutely, Mr. Houghton. So what we'll seek to do is to answer your initial questions and the new ones that you put in, so that you get all of the information you've requested, other than where it's commercially confidential and we can't disclose that information at this stage.
Yeah, that's the end of public questions, okay? Okay, we now move on to item 8, and that's the medium-term financial planning. I think we take in the 5 items together. So I'd like to call on Mr. Smith, please.
Thank you, presiding member. And yes, I'm going to give a general preamble which will accompany all of the reports, but I will reserve my right to give some technical advice on the pertinent matters in some of the individual reports. Today marks hopefully the end of a culmination of several months of reports coming either from me to council or through to cabinet in terms of the position that local government faces. And though you should be under no doubt, there are difficult choices and difficult times, but they are not as difficult choices or times as some other authorities are facing. My consistent message all the way through to council and cabinet has been, for every that my colleagues could identify they needed, the council could probably afford £1, and that is why there is an element of truth in everything that has been asked and said in the chamber already by all parties speaking. That yes, undoubtedly lots of cash money going into services over next coming year and the future years, but it is struggling to keep pace with demand, demography and inflation. And on that inflation matter, be under no illusion, the inflation pressures of the previous couple of years have eaten in massively into all public service spending power. And although the focus will be on headline future inflation, which is undoubtedly going to come down, I would urge you to also not just be fooled by a headline rate. As a former economist before an accountant, I am interested in the non-volatile, stripped out base levels of inflation, and I make the distinction between goods, which are likely to soon face deflation, and services, which remain above 6% in terms of inflation. And the last time I checked, councils were very much mostly in the business of providing services through staff and other service provision, and a number of arrangements that have been made through the real living wage and pledges by Welsh Government, which bake in some very substantial price pressures way beyond any headline levels that you may read about in any of the papers. For the public, if anyone is watching or interested, for the avoidance of doubt, you hear a lot about upper tier authorities having a 5% cash limit before they have to consult on council tax. That applies in England only. For those that have been intrigued as to why in Wales most are going higher, there is no cap in Wales. It is perhaps telling, though, that 95% of all upper tier authorities in England seem to be going with that 5%, 4.99% increase. I think it is telling that there are pressures across the piece. If you look at Wales as a whole, there is a very wide-ranging set of increases proposed by authorities, and they're all a little bit fluid. But on my last check of this morning, I believe what is in front of you will be the 4th lowest proposed council tax increase in Wales. Some of it is not magic. Some of it depends on how relatively short-term cash-rich authorities are, how much they're carrying in reserves versus how much they've already deployed. You last year deployed a very substantial amount of reserves. It is a slower and lower amount this year because I've got to give you advice ultimately to make sure that it lasts through the longer term. But the reality is you've got very limited levers available to you. And whilst some additional money came from Welsh Government in the various iterations of the budget, it doesn't cover our core pressures. And therefore council tax, which is the smallest part of our block funding, effectively has to do some of the heavy lifting. And that's why you've got very high increases proposed in a number of authorities. And I do think, on balance, that given that you will wish to protect services as best you can with some of those concerns that have already been expressed, but also trying to strike a balance in terms of something that is potentially affordable, but still somewhat challenging for many of you in terms of those levels of increase, given there is a cost of living crisis, I think in the circumstances, we have done the best we can as officers, and I pay tribute to my officers who've had to work on 22-23 accounts, preparing for 23-24, preparing for the first year of Oracle Fusion closure, and dealing with a whole raft of budget proposals that have come from Welsh Government late because they've come from UK Government late. And as the leader mentioned, this is in the vacuum of no medium-term envelope available to us. So we're having to work a little bit in the dark. I've referred in previous years to it being a fuzzy felt budget over the years through the COVID period. This perhaps is a bit more of a blancmange one. Throw it at the wall, see what sticks, hope no one pokes me with a stick too much and it doesn't wobble too much. I'm going to be fairly serious in the rest of the session today, but I always like to try and get one or two allegories in. If I go for too many more, the reality is that you'll start wanting to replace me with artificial intelligence, because I think that was the thing that was the biggie in the Chancellor's budget announcement today. There is a headline, late breaking, £170 million alleged Barnet consequential coming through to Wales. It'll be for others to see how that washes through. Some element of good news in that there's going to be no further reductions in the assumed levels of public sector spending, but those public sector spending assumptions remain at 1% real terms growth for the lot. And given that the NHS and the military tend to be protected, it means it is perfectly likely there could be very substantial pressures on budgets in all future years. I will briefly speak about that when I come to the MTFP in due course. But the reality is these are not fun times for public services. When you look at core spending power, you've got to strike a reasonable balance. And I think compared to where other Welsh authorities are, you are striking a reasonable balance. And I think compared to across the border, Welsh authorities are striking as best a balance as they can. That's probably all I can say in terms of commentary on the national announcements, because I mustn't get involved in the politics. But at the moment, I make no assumptions that there's any more money coming directly to local government as a result of today's announcements. And I will talk you through some of the technical adjustments I need to advise you on, simply because literally no sooner did I publish cabinet papers, out came the Welsh Government proposals. No sooner did I publish council papers, out came the revised Welsh Government papers. I make no criticism of Welsh Government or officials. We're all working in a very, very compressed timescale. So I think that's it in terms of my overarching preamble, and I will speak on a couple of the items in due course, presiding member. But that's it in terms of my overall advice when you think about, is this a reasonable set of proposals across all the reports in front of you, between the planning estimates I've made for the future versus the budget in front of you versus the trade-off between revenue and capital? What is affordable? What is palatable to you as members in terms of a council tax increase? And ultimately, as we get all the way through to the statutory resolutions in due course. So thank you, presiding member. I will pause at that point.
Okay, I should have read this out at the beginning. It's Section 151, Officer Ben Smith is to give an overall technical presentation of all the budget reports. Councillors will then be invited to ask broad technical questions of the 151 officer. Then the leader of the council to give a broad budget presentation. This will cover several agenda items, and I will extend that time as allowed under the Constitution. Each report will then be dealt with individually. The 151 officer will speak specifically on each report, and councillors will have any opportunity to ask questions relating to the reports. So are there any technical questions for Mr. Smith, please? Councillor Bennett, sorry.
Thank you, presiding member. I know we've discussed the Mid and West Wales Fire Authority levy before. I looked back on the mid-term financial plan for the Fire Authority. I was just wondering why our line here doesn't match what the Fire Authority are suggesting their MTFP is.
So, Councillor, we're in the fortunate position that we are affected. The way the Fire Authority does it is by population in the first instance. And in the past, my future estimates are based on future assumptions and past announcements, and we have had a lower increase than any of the other constituent authorities, because I think you'll have seen increases as a whole for the Fire Authority across the 6 bodies, but because they allocate it by population, if population varies between the authorities relatively, and they have been significantly updated as a result of the 2021 census, you will see some significant deviations between the individual authorities. And it is certainly the case that for 24-25 and following through into the future years into the MTFP, we have lower pro rata increase in some of the other authorities because of the way the population has shifted between the 6 authorities on that updated census 2021 data.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Councillor Rice.
Thank you, presiding member. Just a couple of quick questions for the Section 151 officer in terms of technical ones. Do you foresee any issues with the draw of reserves in this year's budget and a potential cliff edge going forward in the medium financial plan? And has there been anything that has changed the status of or the potential impacts on the capital equalisation reserve and the insurance reserve since the cabinet meeting in February?
Mr. Smith, please.
So in terms of the level of draw of reserves, I remain relaxed. They are not insignificant, but they are not as large as in previous years, because I was worried in previous years at the pace and scale of draw. As the leader has already alluded to, the primary reason is a draw to support schools for 1 more year because of the pressures that are recognised. And it is an unusual device. I will speak about a bit more about it on the individual items. It is unusual to take a reserve and draw it in full, so I'll perhaps go into a bit more detail in due course. But in terms of this high-level preamble, the overall quantum does not concern me, given the scale of our earmarked reserves. For the avoidance of doubt, we have one of the highest levels of earmarked reserves, but one of the lowest levels of general reserves. And when it comes to my certification as to the adequacy of reserves, the two do balance each other out to some degree. You asked about insurance reserves. I'll come back to the cliff edge in a moment and the phrase used. In terms of insurance reserves, no, there is nothing material to change my view. The capital equalisation reserve is a complicated beast, further complicated by some of the items are referred in budget monitoring through 23-24 as provisions, which may well be ultimately written back into 22-23's accounts because they are not finalised, and that may result in the capital equalisation reserve being drawn faster than first anticipated for 22-23 closing and therefore 23-24 opening position, but then it flips in terms of the timing into the current year. So the proposals for all of the amendments from the different parties would not materially change my view overall as to the adequacy of the capital equalisation reserve. And as long as you continue to take my advice around banking the savings short term on the beneficial windfall we have got from our borrowing strategy and putting them back into the capital equalisation reserve, it should be able to be sustained for a number of years and help smooth some of the matters that are before you. The word cliff edge is used, and in one sense it's the right word, and I recognise it with the discussions we've had with school leaders and the school budget forum, but in another it's the wrong word. If I'd allowed at a technical build a budget to be set with loads of reserves being drawn from the base and then the cliff edge arriving, that would concern me. For the avoidance of doubt, there are two very substantial temporary boosts to schools' reserves through both the energy fund and the school's ICT reserve, which enables us to help schools slow the draw of their own reserves. Now, that might feel a bit like semantics and me dancing on the head of a pin, but it is a fundamentally different proposition to building stuff into the base and then truly the cliff edge coming. I do not deny that I am concerned, as are all treasurers, about the sustainability of schools' budgets, and Cabinet and the Council and the leader has already referred to it and did so in the meeting with school leaders and the School Budget Forum, and with their support agreed that we would propose to draw the sums that are before you. It is an unusual device, but it shows the scale of the pressures. So that pressure is undoubtedly coming, and I am concerned about how 25-26 is addressed, but I would perhaps take slight issue with the phrasing immediately it being termed a cliff edge, even though we've all colloquially referred to it as a cliff edge, including myself on several occasions, because that clearly is not sustainable. They are both turbocharged sums to try and help schools slow their own draw from reserves. And I would remind members that there are two authorities in Wales that have schools reserves in excess of 20 million. It's us and Cardiff. Now, I know we are big authorities, but we are still relatively well provided in terms of levels of schools reserves compared to some other authorities, because I do read other authorities' reports and you see them whole school sector already in negative position, reserves already gone, and therefore you see a lot of the wiggle room removed, and hence why you have a very, very wide range of council tax increases being proposed by the 22 authorities. Thank you, presiding member.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any more questions? Councillor Holly.
Thank you, Presiding Member. Mr. Smith, we've had this discussion in the scrutiny board, but I think many members need to understand this, that under the medium-term financial plan, we have factored in an additional borrowing of £50 million. That's in there on a nominal interest rate. That nominal interest rate is between 3 and 5%. Can you explain how you can actually do that on the technical way that is done, so that we can program it in that plan because of that interest rate, and we haven't borrowed it yet?
Yeah, it's one of the dark arts, as we've often jested about, isn't it, Councillor, in terms of it. But you delegate enormous powers to me to choose to do borrowing, the actual physical external borrowing, at any time that I see fit, because the reality is the money markets and PWLB loans are priced against gilts in the money markets, do move twice. They move all the time, but they're priced twice a day. The reality is the bulk of our previous borrowing was done when I was certain it was advantageous to do at sub 2% and avoid the current 5.5% interest rates. Frankly, I do not want to borrow that £50 million, which is committed to, plus technically the bit for the Mumblesea defences, because there's a very convoluted way in which part of it's funded through revenue support grant. So I have at the moment, nominally, as you rightly say, put it in for 2028. I am waiting, without doubt, for interest rates to fall. I managed on appointment, I inherited interest rates on the pool loan fund of 6%, and I managed, as a result of restructuring that debt programme, to get the pool rate down to 3.5%. I would be mortified if I found myself in a position where I had to borrow at a rate above that. I may still be forced to at some point in terms of net additional new borrowing, but I'm able to defer it until a time of my choosing, simply because we are the richest in cash authority in Wales. Now, that make your ears prick up, won't it? Because you think it's got loads of spare cash down the back of the sofa. Our earmarked reserves are high. We have borrowed against our medium-term financial plan and locked in that money for 1.something% for 50 years. There is an additional commitment. I am simply able to draw down some of my cash balances. Audit Wales, look at the liquidity ratio of every authority in Wales. We are by far the strongest in cash balance terms, and that affords me maximum flexibility to decide when I go to the market. If you're an authority that is tight on cash and is forced to borrow today at 5, 6, 7%, it is not a happy experience. I'm frankly able to just sit it out for a number of years. I've got to be prudent and make sure it's reflected in the lifetime of this administration. So that's why it's in the MTFP end loaded, because I'm waiting for rates to drop down. And I will be drawing it from reserves normally in the first interest, but make no doubt I will be externalising that debt. But my aim and aspiration is to make sure I can get it away at below 3.5% and therefore not disadvantage the pool rate. I do not believe I'm ever going to get 1.something% money again. It was a no-brainer last time for me. I felt I couldn't lose, so I filled my boots. I now need to sit on the sidelines and start spending down some of those large cash balances. I'm afraid for members, it is in the really boring, really technical, complicated bit of the Treasury strategy that no one much reads. And if you get it right, you can make good short-term gains for the authority. If you get it wrong, you can go spectacularly wrong and end up with no money and be forced to go for government bailout and pay a premium on top for it. So I'm using the powers afforded to me as your treasurer to time the market as best I can. I don't take big risks because I am risk averse as a public servant, but so far I've got quite lucky in terms of my timing decisions in the recent 5-6 years. And I hope to get lucky again because the outlook is only down for interest rates, but I do not expect them to fall particularly rapidly. And that's why I've end loaded them at the end of the medium term financial plan. I hope that gives a flavour of the answer. I do appreciate it is perhaps the most sort of eye glazing over technical part of the whole thing that the dark arts that treasurers do is. But frankly, I've got time and money on my side on your behalf and others haven't.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I think we're all aware of the dark arts that take part in the Treasurer's Department, and the fact that we are the cash richest council in Wales, and we have this huge amount of money. The borrowings that we do currently and the money that we loan comes out of that money we've already borrowed. So we are making money, £3 million a year on interest. So when we've put in the medium-term financial plan, that 50 million, we haven't actually borrowed it yet, but we are using what monies we have now to supplement that until we have to borrow in the future. Is that correct?
That is correct, presiding member and Councillor Holly. I am drawing cash in the meantime, and I will have to do it in due course. I've priced it in terms of the revenue budgets. I would emphasise one other bit just to make your eyes glaze over even further. When I've emphasised no new net additional borrowing until towards the end of the MTFP, I do have some PWLB debt maturing in the next couple of years. We have interest-only debt. I also do have some quite sizable lender option, borrower option loans on the balance sheet, which I inherited. Those are even more complicated dark arts. That's dark arts and a dark covered on a very, very dark night type stuff. Relatively complicated. Some of those will get to their decision point for stick or twist on the game of financial roulette, and I will make appropriate decisions in due course. Some will become clear very, very shortly. I can't go into further detail because the transactions with those non-PWLB lenders would be market sensitive and I couldn't refer to the individual details, but I am very active in the Treasury market at the moment for some of our more not unusual, are more slightly more complicated non-PWLB stuff that a number of authorities carry. If anyone ever wants a 5-hour session on the joys and delights of what a lender option, borrower option loan is, I'm more than happy to facilitate it, but I'm sure you could find much more exciting things like paint drying.
I have to say, Mr. Smith, I think that would be an excellent idea for somebody with insomnia, but thank you very much for your answers.
Before we move on to the leader, can I remind everybody that's online to put your cameras on, please? You need to be seen. Thank you. I'd like to call on the leader now, please. Chris, can you put your light off? Councillor Holly, Chris, can you put your light off? Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, thank you, presiding member. Yep. Going to run through the budget. There may be a few stars of the past that make a reappearance in this run, so prepare yourselves. No, I just wanted to do as Mr. Smith has done, but try and do it in I think, a more simplified way, which hopefully is a bit more digestible in terms of what we are dealing with. So the budget context, first of all, just to say, as you know, ahead of today, we think there's new money in the system today, but we'll wait and see. May not be. At the moment, Wales has had 305 million as we had for the budget this year. That's the entirety of Wales spending that money. And as I've said before, we spend over 200 million on education alone in Swansea, so it doesn't go very far. That meant that we in Swansea had about £15.5 million extra. The Welsh Government have tweaked that a bit since, but it's not a great deal of money. Our pressures this year are around £50 million. So as you can see, the new money doesn't cover the pressures that we're facing, and those are wage pressures, energy pressures, and a number of others. And of course, we've been carrying inflation pressures. Inflation has now started to come down, but for a long period of time, it was quite high, up as high as 11%. And of course, those are built in. They never go away. They remain as part of the pressures in the system. So outside of that, of course, we've still got the results of the Kwasang Truss budget, cost of living crisis, high inflation and energy costs. Unfunded pay deals, those are the other thing. The UK government and others talk about pay deals. They do strike deals, but then they do not provide the money in order to pay them. And then, of course, you've got higher mortgage costs as well, which homeowners are facing. So there's a few people you could blame for that. There's a few of them up there. I'm not sure what Theresa May is actually doing to Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson. But the one we haven't got up there, she's got to come back, is the old lettuce herself, Liz Truss, who obviously made things a whole lot worse. And as Mr. Smith said, the reason we've got high borrowing costs at the moment is as a result of that Truss budget. So dipping into the revenue budget, first of all, we start with education. And let's start with the overall investment in services. So net of all of the decisions, as Mr. Smith alluded to, and as I confirmed in the questions, there's a net £40 million extra going into budgets. That is cash in terms of core funding, as well as the use of reserves. So that is additional money going in this year over and above what we'd put in previous years. In education and schools, we're in a position where schools will get over an extra 17.6 million, and that accounts for the pension money we believe is also making its way to schools, and takes us to a record amount of £232 million for schools this year. That's an increase of 6.4% in the schools budget, way above the current level of inflation. But as I said, schools are carrying a large amount of inflationary pressures and wage pressures. We are, as Mr. Smith alluded to as well, providing energy help to schools and other services this year, but a record amount going into schools, but will not meet all of the pressures that schools face. In terms of social care, my screen plays. Apologies, seems to have frozen. I think Teams is frozen for a second, sorry. Start that. Okay, hopefully, is it not sharing, is it? Okay, 2 seconds. There we are. We should be back now, hopefully. There we go. Okay. So in terms of care, prevention and poverty services, that sees a larger increase, or the largest percentage increase of any section of the council this year, an increase of 8.9%, more than twice the level of inflation, and a cash increase of £14 million, taking that to a record amount of investment at £171 million. In terms of the announcement I made earlier, the council has also committed to invest around £100,000 this year into setting up Cwtch Mawr and supporting the activities there. And again, we're seeking to continue that investment in future years until it becomes a mature charity operation. In terms of place-based services, they'll see an increase this year of around £11.4 million. And I'm just referencing the amendment that you'll already have seen that we intend to move later. So if that amendment is approved by Council this evening, that will include an extra £3 million for road repairs, potholes and the patching service. In terms of homes and housing, again, it's another record year of investment from the HRA. Remember, this is rents paid by tenants being used to invest to improve properties. And the commitment there is to provide £55 million of investment and to continue that level until 27-28. So committing £250 million to invest in our housing stock over the next few years. And again, significant scale previous years. And just for comparison, I just thought I'd reference this because we know we've got an amendment from the Uplands group of ex-Lib Dem councillors and cabinet members. There they are with one of their colleagues. So if you have a look at their record, when they were the cabinet member for housing and the cabinet member for finance, the investment was just £9 million, despite having £31 million in reserves. I know Paxton Hood-William is not with us this evening, but again, he will remember if he was here, and I'm sure he'd have intervened to mention the fact that we, as part of a scrutiny panel, did move the use of reserves so that money was invested in our housing stock. And of course, the previous administration did try and sell off our housing stock, which is something that we prevented. And in that time as well, the then cabinet member for finance and cabinet member for housing also disposed of about £2.7 million worth of council homes through right to buy, making worse the situation that we now found ourselves in, where hundreds of houses are needed. Of course, we're rebuilding those houses and acquiring new houses, but I was quite surprised to see the amendment this evening, probably trying to right the wrongs. But I thought I'd bring him back because he was popular last year. It's old Pointy Pete helping us to do this. He's been doing some great work with the CWAT team, as I understand at the moment. Yes, I understand. And of course, the other thing that was brushed over during that time is, of course, since we've been in administration, we have slowed the growth of houses of multiple occupation by working with the Welsh Government. The rise in HMOs in Uplands during the time when Councillor May was the cabinet member and Councillor Rice was the finance member was over 400% in terms of the rate in HMOs. So that is something that we have stopped. So there we are. Thank you, Pete, for pointing that one out. Very, very, very appreciated. Moving on to the bus travel and bus services. Through the reinstatement of the Welsh grant, we will see around £4 million extra going in over what was originally planned. And at Cabinet, we moved an amendment to the budget report to include an additional 400,000 so that we can continue the free bus rides service on to selected dates during the school holidays. And that commitment from Welsh Government is a multi-year scheme. So that will see around £22 million extra for bus services. Now, we've been very clear as administration, once the bus bill is agreed, we will seek to try and intervene in that market, and where necessary, run bus services ourselves. We feel that would be a better use of taxpayers' money, where we can provide better, more reliable services at a cheaper cost. Moving on to the capital budget, some big numbers in year again this year. So hopefully we haven't frozen again. Yep, there we go. Just to confirm, we are investing in a fleet of 37 new refuse vehicles. That will see investment of about £8.4 million over the next few months. In terms of one of our amendments, which we'll come to later on, if agreed this evening, then, as I said earlier, we're proposing to put an extra £3 million into road repairs, and we'd seek to take that from the capital equalisation reserve, £1 million as a one-off reserve, a one-off draw, and then £2 million from the insurance reserve, bringing that money forward to spend all in next year to help get more of our roads, repairs, potholes and patching done. That would take us up to about £8.4 million. In terms of changing facilities, one of the things that has been clear to us, and I'm grateful to Councillor Robert Francis Davis for championing this, you'll know that we've been investing heavily in new play areas across Swansea. They're in now, I think, every ward. that was over £7 million invested there. We've also committed to improve other facilities across the city, and of course up in Bonnymaen at the moment we're creating the largest ever East Side sports facility, the new barn, which will open later this year. And as part of that investment, we're also completing the job that was left undone on Kevin Hengoyd School by ensuring that the remainder of the school is also upgraded, something left by the previous administration during their time. But we will see that sports facility open. But it's clear that there's been an explosion of girls and young women playing sports, specifically soccer. Many of our changing facilities are male-only facilities, and therefore we feel it's important that we begin the process of upgrading those facilities to make them available to be used by both girls and boys. So proposing £1 million to start that programme. Then in terms of community projects, members will know that they have an increased community budget, which we raised at the beginning of this term from £10,000 to £15,000 per annum. In the previous term, we were successful in adding to that to allow members to draw down some match funding from a central pot. We intend to do that again this year. So if this is approved as part of an amendment, then members would have access to a further pot of money so that they can get on with bigger projects in their local communities based on what the community priorities are in their area. And I've always believed that councillors are the best place to decide what their community priorities would be because they're closest to the people in their wards. And then finally, on this bit of the presentation, we already committed last year £1 million. We've been busily working with the designers and the deliverers of those schemes to develop the plans for the 2 new strategic skate parks. We will deploy that money this year, as well as use that money to upgrade the existing 13 skate facilities across the city. Moving on to major projects. These are, again, ones that feature in the medium-term financial plan, but you will see progress on this year. We were successful in securing £20 million worth of levelling up funding. But as I've said before, as it's a Tory government, you don't get given money unless you actually put money up. So we have to put £10 million into that. This is part of the broader river corridor regeneration. And if you've been down to the river corridor recently, you'll see that the new pontoons are in place. That will allow boats like the Copper Jack, but as well as that, river taxis to run. It will also allow us to restore all of the historic buildings along the river corridor, which are part of our Copperopolis heritage. Penderyn is already working and has successfully repurposed one of the buildings, then is operating obviously as the distillery and visitor centre. The top picture shows you the Strand tunnels, and again we intend to open some of the old Strand tunnels that have been blocked up for a number of years and operate them as small businesses that can go to local businesses to use, and then lift that will take you from the Strand up to the High Street, because we know the connectivity between the Strand and the High Street is not as good as it could be. Also in this scheme is a significant extension to Wales's oldest museum, Swansea Museum, moving out towards Museum Green, which will allow us to surface many of our collections that we currently have that the public don't get to see. So again, a really good heritage project, and again, congratulations to Councillor Francis Davis and Paul Relf and his team for the work they've done to secure that bid. Mr Smith mentioned earlier, we're working with Welsh Government and being funded to undertake flood defence works around the Mumbles area. That is giving us the opportunity to also redo the promenade. And you'll see in due course the new wider promenade coming into use. That is also giving us the opportunity to install new parks, new green areas, new landscaping, new seating areas, some reworked parking around the Mumbles area, and of course deliver on the commitment which is already underway to light the entire bay with about £400,000 going in to provide low level lighting around the bay. With that in mind, the scheme is on track, and we hope to see this open very, very soon. And again, not only producing some great flood defences for businesses and residents in Mumbles, but giving us a brand new promenade where cyclists and pedestrians will have sufficient space to use that wonderful promenade during the many months of the year that they can. We're also shortly to start formal work on the new Castle Square Gardens. We've now completed the site investigations, so that will begin. And again, for those of you not familiar with the scheme, it will see a 61% increase in green space, new play fountains created, 2 new cafes or retail units in there, and again, will hopefully be a new green heart in our city centre, which we can be proud of as part of that broader regeneration. 7172 Kingsway, you'll know that we were successful in securing the £1.3 billion city deal. Swansea had a number of projects as part of the digital waterfront delivery. This is the second city deal one to come along. If you've been down the Kingsway recently, you will see that it is looking pretty much now like the artist's impression. It should be completed very shortly, and then final fit out will take place in the next few months with the aim of opening in June this year. We've already believe that we're about 50% let on the building, and again, our agents are in discussions with tenants to fill the building. So again, we propose around 600 people being based there in due course as part of that city deal investment. Oh no. Should have had Andrew. Don't start that argument. I'll have to restart again. Sorry, apologies. Please. Okay, hopefully we're back. We also have been heavily intervening in some of the large buildings that have lain empty in the city for a number of decades, namely 2 historic buildings, the Palace Theatre and the Albert Hall. The Palace Theatre, council-led regeneration, now coming to completion. People will see the scaffolding coming down very shortly, revealing the new restored facade of the building, the new roof line, going back to its original roof line. We've already fully let the building to Tramshed Tech, and there'll be 300 people working in that building from the summer of this year. I did say the Albert Hall, we skipped that slide, apologies, but the Albert Hall essentially is also due for completion in the summer, and again was a private-led scheme, but we were able to help them secure the grants in order for that scheme to take place. So I wanted to just talk about borrowing and some of the decisions we talked to Mr. Smith about in the technical questions. I thought we'd have another game of Lib Dems play your cash right, just to see whether what Jeff and others have suggested was correct or whether what we have done is correct. So let's have a look at the difference between the Lib Dems and Independents approach and the Labour approach. So when they were in power, they borrowed £81 million. That is today's figure. If you we've borrowed 135 million, which Mr. Smith referred to earlier, but we borrowed it at historically low rates, and the cost of repaying the Lib Dem borrowing is the equivalent of 6.8 million a year. The cost of repaying our borrowing, because it's at such a lower rate, is only 5.9 million pounds a year. In terms of the average rate that they borrowed at, it's 5.5%. The average rate we borrowed at is 3.5%, but of course we actually locked in our borrowing at much lower than that, at 1.96%. And they had a budget of around 700 million, so they were borrowing more against less money. We have a budget of 900 million, so we borrowed less against more money. So it was the Lib Dems play your cash wrong, I would say. Going on to make the point again, just some other figures for you. So one of the things here is, of course, decisions, especially council tax. I know we've got amendments on council tax tonight. One of the things about council tax, which I'm sure Mr. Smith has said many times, is that council tax is a automatically re-earned increase or loss. So if you don't raise council tax and you have inflation at a certain level, you are automatically reducing the money available to services. And you will automatically do that every year subsequently. So in 2011 and 12, there was a decision by the previous administration to set a 0% council tax. That was an election year, you're absolutely right. We cautioned against it at the time. We cautioned against it at the time because you don't only lose the money that year, you lose it every year since. And the lost money to this authority, to services from that decision over the last 12 years has been over £70 million. So again, going back to Mr. Thraves' question and to others' questions, if you were in that position now, you would have either £70 million of higher reserves, or you'd have £70 million to deploy into services. So, you know, decisions do matter. And again, had we have done a Jeff, as they call it, done a Kwarteng, they call it nationally, I think, but done a Jeff, and listened to Jeff's caution on borrowing, and Mr. Smith had waited, then I've asked Mr. Smith to rerun the numbers. And had we have taken the borrowing out now at today's rates, we would have had to pay over £4 million per annum more for our borrowing. And over the 50 years, this council would have had to pay £200 million more for the same money. So I know, Jeff, you were cautious, but you were also wrong on this one. And I think Mr. Smith and this administration have been proved right. Also, of course, we inherited borrowing that was taken out at rates of up to 8%. Now, when the Leader of the Opposition was interviewed about our level of borrowing and our total level of debt, I can't remember his thing, but he was getting sleepless nights, I think. I don't know what 8% borrowing would have done to him at the time. But this Labour administration has repaid over £170 million worth of historic expensive debt taken out by previous administrations. Now, I say repaid, and I'm going to qualify that because the way in which the technical system works is that you don't repay it until you get to the point, but we have to set it aside every year. So we have set aside £170 million ready to pay off historic debt. So it is money that's repaid. So that figure that was quoted in the press was inaccurate because it does not take into account a number of factors, including the fact we are a housing organisation. We have our own housing stock. We have the largest housing stock in Wales. And there are many millions of pounds worth of debt related to housing as a result of that, which we carry, which other authorities don't. 11 of the other authorities don't have housing stock. And as we didn't sell it off. We stopped it being sold off. And as Mr. Smith referenced, not only do we have healthy levels of reserves, as do our schools, our liquidity, the strength of our resources versus our debt is the strongest and the most resilient in Wales. We are the most resilient council in Wales. I think the rating which they give, if you're rated at 1, which most councils are, that is the average. We are rated at 3.5, more than 3 times as strong as most of the other councils in Wales in terms of our finances. And again, my thanks go to Mr. Smith and his officers for the financial strategy and the advice that they continue to give us. So again, it's not just about what you borrow and how you use the money, but the rate at which you borrow it and how your ability to repay it. There was a discussion earlier about safeguarding jobs, and just repeat the point here. When we were in October, looking at the finances then, and in terms of the likely funding that we were able to get, we were looking at hundreds of potential posts going. And if you look around Wales, some councils are having to make hundreds of people redundant this year. We are not. We have 28 posts at risk, and as I've said, 14 of those are currently vacant, and others have put their hands up for early voluntary severance or retirement. So again, we cannot give an absolute guarantee of no compulsory redundancies, but we're pretty confident that we're working with the unions, working with our colleagues. And again, my thanks go to Cabinet members and CMT for the work that they've done in terms of balancing the budget and trying to redirect the money that we have to make sure we keep people in jobs and we avoid compulsory redundancies. Just to paint the picture here in terms of where we are on council tax, the blue chart on the left of the screen were the proposed rates for most of the councils. Some of those have changed. Cardiff is now at 6%. Some of the others have crept up a few percent. We, coming into this year, were below the average for council tax in Wales. And after this year, we will be further below the average for council tax in Wales because most other authorities are going up by more than we are proposing. At the current level, we believe we will be the 4th lowest council tax in Wales this year. In terms of council tax proposal, therefore, it's in Welsh there first, and I'll switch it in to English. So, as we said previously, we are still carrying a significant levy for council tax for the fire authority. It is something we've lobbied Welsh Government to make a precept rather than a levy because it means it has to come from within council resources rather than coming externally. So our core council tax requirement this year is 4.9%, but we also have to raise the fire levy, which adds a further 1%, making that total of 5.99%. That's the equivalent of about £1.40 per week for a Band B property. And this, if you look around Wales in terms of the decisions, I know a number of councils are meeting this evening, same as we are, but some have already made their decision. An independent run Pembrokeshire are going for 16.5%, and Plaid run Ceredigion are going for 13.5%, but many are going for double-digit rises this year. And I just point out, because I know a number of our ward members will have streets that half are in Neath Talbot, half are in Swansea. If you're lucky enough to live in Swansea, your council tax will remain more than £200 a year lower than the people the other side of the street who are in independent run Neath Talbot, which is over £200 a year more expensive. And that is the totality of the budget. Thank you all for listening. And again, Chair, Presiding Member, if we can now return to the reports, and obviously we'll have the debates on the amendments. And I serve notice of the ones that I've included in my presentation. Thank you.
Go back to the agenda then, and we go back to Mr. Ben Smith, please, to talk us on the medium-term financial plan.
Thank you, Presiding Member. In recognition of the leader daring to suggest I'm somewhat indigestible, I'll be nice and quick on this one because it is a series of planning assumptions in the absence of any medium-term offer from UK Government or Welsh Government. And I thought I was the cheekiest economist and accountant going. I couldn't possibly repeat some of the comments that have been made by the Institute for Fiscal Studies or the Office of Budget Responsibility as to the degree of fiction applied to any of those national figures. Couldn't possibly comment. But my assumptions, and you've got one recommendation in front of you, is are they reasonable planning assumptions in the absence of not knowing very, very much on the basis of what we've been told to date, where Welsh Government has prioritised money into the NHS and local government relatively. The UK update clearly indicates that protected departments such as the NHS and the military are going to take the bulk of any spending increase. I am very firmly in the super positive camp. I have assumed that inflation will trend down to 2% headline, and that we may get 2% in cash in our settlement. If we get worse than that, it'll be much, much worse. If we get better than that, it'll be much, much better. All treasurers are in a different place on this and the degree to which they rely on it. I think they are a reasonable set of assumptions in the circumstances that we face. I do believe that policy choices will have to be made by UK Government and Welsh Government to not result in just a linear read across from the headline figures in the budget, the spending review and Welsh Government's own assumptions. Something will have to give at some point. So I've assumed that middle line of 2% cash, 2% inflation, which for the avoidance of doubt is real terms going absolutely nowhere. And given demand, demography, and often our price pressures and wage pressures are well above headline inflation, it's not still a pretty place to be in, but it's a better place than many are assuming they are in. So I don't think I need to labour the rest of the report because I think there's more meat elsewhere on the agenda. Those are planning assumptions. You are asked to consider whether, given the preamble I've given earlier on and the advice I've given today, that my reasonable optimism, given I'm an accountant and an economist, so I've got one dark art and one pessimism as a specialism, I think they are reasonable assumptions. So that's all I need to give in terms of technical advice. Thank you, Presiding Member.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Okay.
What part of the budget are we at now?
We're at the medium-term financial plan. I'm going to go to a vote in a minute, but I need a proposer and a seconder first, please.
Nothing at all.
Yes, very happy to move the MTFP, Chair.
Seconder?
More than happy to second.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, presiding member. I was just being clear that you mentioned that you'd move to the vote straight after the proposal and the seconder. So I just wanted a chance to make some political comments about the proposals as well. So yeah, what goodies have we got stored in the medium-term financial plan? Obviously, you know, it should be that all three tiers of government will all be Labour next year. We hope for a national Labour government from many people in the room. We will have a new Labour leader in the Senedd, and we'll have Labour still here. So hopefully I'll see millions and millions of additional pounds coming into the direction of the coffers of the council. However, if that doesn't happen and we need to look for savings, what goodies have we got in store between now and the next election? Sale of the Mansion House. Okay, well, that's arguable. Some people might want to do that. Then a reduction to all the support for asset transfer. Okay, well, people might argue that one either way. Getting rid of or divesting in St Helens. Introducing residence parking permit costs at £20. A removal of the pledge of a 48-hour pothole pledge. No out-of-hours response for noise nuisance or pests unless it's an absolute emergency. A reducing street cleansing. A closing of a recycling centre. A reducing black bin collection. Some people think that's happened already anyway, if you look at some of the places around the city. Reduce public toilets, improvements by 50%. If you look at when tourists come to Swansea and people ask, what is it that they really want to see improved? And I'm sure Councillor Robert Francis Davis agreed with me, it's public toilets is one of the #1 things they'd like to see. And the final one then is a reduction by 50% in play equipment budget. So those are the things we can look forward to. The second thing that's also worth bearing in mind, whilst I fully agree with the leader and their proposal to put more money into education, how do we deal with the fact that we're funding that from reserves going forward? And I think that's a key question because it will make pressure on these other items even stronger. And just to answer one of the points led by the leader in the last presentation, which I found very interesting, is if you look at the £70 million that you think you would have had if we hadn't gone for the zero council tax back in 2012, where's that money come from? Well, it doesn't come from a magic fairy. It comes from people's pockets. So there's been £70 million extra in people's pockets in that period of time.
Thank you, Chair. I'll answer those. I'll do it in reverse. Well, thanks for acknowledging that you have created a £70 million pressure on the council. Very, very, very grateful for you putting your hands up to that one. Very good to do that. On the MTFP, I don't know how long it's been since you were Cabinet Member for Finance, but just to remind you what an MTFP is, it is a set of proposals that could be deployed in order to balance the budget should future pressures arise. It's a crystal ball. And I would remind you that these are proposals and suggestions that are made by officers, which are presented to politicians for politicians to consider. The reasons that you won't see those in this year's or last year's or the previous year's proposals were because they're not at this point in time politically supportable, and I don't think they are likely to be politically supportable in future years. They are what the officers are required to do, which is to come up with a plan that can balance over the medium term. And as I've said previously, they are there as a crystal ball. Mr. Smith makes it clear in the MTFP, if more money turns up, and we all hope for a Labour government in London that will stop the rot that we've currently got with the Tories. If more money turns up, then many of the pressures go away. If money continues to be taken out of the system, then the pressures get greater. And I think that is absolutely the choice that is before the people of the country in due course, which is you can avoid another 5 years of austerity. In terms of reserves, yes, I would agree with you that the use of reserves is worrying, and that's why we're doing it prudently. But it does seem to me that your concern is inconsistent with your amendment. because you're about to take us through an amendment on the next item where you're proposing yourself to remove 0.7 million pounds worth of education money and spend it on highways. So your first action as amending the budget is to take money out of schools and spend it on roads. And you're telling us about being worried about the cliff edge. I think you need to give a bit more thought to the things that you put forward, because that I don't think is a sensible move. And quite frankly, I would expect head teachers and teachers to be very worried about any proposal to remove money from schools at a time when they're facing a cliff edge.
Any more questions? Okay, it's been moved and seconded then, so I'm going to go to the vote. All those in favour of the medium-term financial plan 25, 26, 27, 28, can I have a show of hands for, please? Okay, anybody against? Any abstentions? Okay, that's carried. Okay. We now move on to item 9, and there is a process to be followed. You've all had a copy of the process. Do you want me to read it, or are you all happy for it to just proceed? Okay. Okay, we go on to item number 9 then, and that's, let me just find my page. That's the revenue budget, and I'd like to hand over to the 151 officer, please, to give his technical presentation. This will include a technical adjustment to the original report. Okay, over to you, Mr. Smith, please.
Thank you, presiding member, and this is the one I will go a bit slower on and labour a few points because I think it's the busiest part of the agenda and the most pressing in front of you. As you rightly say, there is a process to be followed. So in terms of my technical advice, on page 55, you have 2 recommendations in front of you so that when I've done my bit and all the other processes have gone through, we will get ultimately to a substantive motion. But it is this decision that ultimately, once passed, in whatever form, drives the council tax decision to come. On page 56, I would remind at the bottom that at present in the 23-24 financial year, services are overspent. Frankly, given the size of the authority, it's a relatively small, and it is a much better position than many other authorities face, but nevertheless, we are still overspent at that 3rd quarter, and it's something that does concern me, that people must get themselves back into balance, otherwise it runs the risk of destabilising the whole of the budget strategy. In terms of page 57, at the point at which the papers were published both for Cabinet and then for Council, we were waiting for adjustments from potentially UK government and Welsh government. And in section 3.2, I referenced the £25 million Barnet consequential from the last lot of announcements when there was extra money paid over to English local authorities. And I made reference to the teachers' pensions costs, which were referenced again in today's UK budget, but are still held below the line and are yet to come to Welsh Government and flow through. But I am really super confident that on the basis of what both the Chancellor has said and the Minister for Finance has said in Wales, that the money will come in due course. But clearly you can only deal with today what you know about with certainty. Moving on to page 57, I put a big rider in saying, thanks to the comedic timing of everything, this really was a triple witching hour council, wasn't it? With debates in the Senedd yesterday and today, and at a UK level, but we are where we are. Unfortunately, my reading at the moment is there is nothing material as a result of the flurry of activity of the last couple of days to update you on. Section 3.3 reminds you that when I took the papers to Cabinet, I gave technical advice, and Mystic Ben did his tea leaf reading and guesstimated that there would be a £1.1 million uplift on revenue support grant, our share of the 25 million, which was a split of specific grants and block grants. I have a confession to make. I got that figure completely wrong. It wasn't £1.1 million. I was out by the princely sum of £1,000. Fortunately, Cabinet did delegate authority to me to make minor consequentials. So my first minor consequential technical adjustment would be to reduce that by £1,000 and to remove it from my toing and froing from reserves. I will summate at the end once all of the amendments and we get to a substantive motion, so that you are clear what you will ultimately be voting on. So I got it wrong by £1,000. Apologies for that. I do need to do better on my tea leaf reading on that one. But in the circumstances, all jesting aside, that's about as good as it gets. 4.2 on page 59 indicated that the Welsh Government has said that there would be transfers in relation to 3 specific grants. Now, the custom is always that specific grants which transfer into block grant are clearly worth nothing. They are merely technical adjustments, and it was my intention to give effect to them the same way. So I knew they were coming, but I didn't know the amounts. The Social Services Performance and Improvement Framework Grant is £40,000, albeit one-off, and that would need to be technically adjusted into the social services cash limit. The flood management one is a flat rate £225,000 for each authority. And the child burials one for Swansea is £67,000, which would make a sum total of a £292,000 technical adjustment to place. So the 40 plus the 225 plus the 67 makes a princely sum of £332,000 worth of technical adjustments as a result of specific grants transferring into block. And a reminder, I was out by £1,000 on that £1.1 million previously. That's a minus £1,000, which means that cash limits would need to be technically adjusted by £331,000 because there is £331,000 worth of more block grant. Now, that's not as many numbers as the Chancellor of the Exchequer rattles through when he's in the Commons, but there's still quite a lot of numbers. So I am content at the end, if members so wish me to display on screen the number changes I have made for those technical adjustments. But it is important that I emphasise those bits of what I previously euphemistically referred to as the blancmange or the fuzzy felt. It's set of long reports in front of you. Table 1A on page 60 summarises them on a page, and you've heard some of the earlier debate. Is there money in? Is there money out? There's loads of cash money going in. It's just that there's loads of pressures as well. So there's over £50 million worth of funding requirements. There's just under £50 million worth of savings. And that's why you end up with over £25 million. It's crept up over the last couple of weeks as a result of that additional block grant, that you end up with a net cash investment of £28 million into total council budgets. But as the leader's slide rightly alluded to, because of the way we've reduced the number of central inflation provisions and contingency sums, the amount that goes above the line in the Appendix A is clearly £40 million cash into services, albeit, as some members have noted and public commentators have noted, the schools one is especially turbocharged by one-off support given the pressures that are being faced. And that must weigh in your mind that you understand entirely what is going on there. And that is amplified on page 63 when you see table 1B. I gave advice in November and December and January, and I repeated it again earlier. For every £2 that anyone could evidence, I could probably only recommend technically to provide £1. That pretty much is replicated for schools as well. There's £25 million I'd like to put in. I've got to take half of it out. The figures there are the net figure. They'll look a little bit lower than the leader's slide because technically I cannot yet price in the teachers' pensions money because I haven't got it. But the leader is right to reference it because we've referenced it in the school budget forum and meetings with head teachers. And as I say, the money is there in today's national UK budget. And I have the letter from the Minister for Local Government and for Finance, which makes clear when the money turns up, it is coming. And I would estimate that to be worth about £5 million for Swansea. Apologies, it just means it's yet another number floating around in the ether that can't be pinned down at the moment. But that's the nature of budgets these days. When I were a young nipper, you'd have this in September and you'd have 6 months to work on it. I haven't yet found enough DeLorean time machines to be able to go back and do everything in one foul swoop, but hopefully you'll get a gist of the advice I'm giving as to what is reasonable in front of you once we've got through the rest of the items. The other important things for me to give you technical advice on, section 8, reserves and contingency fund. Look, anyone can debate till the cows come home as to what the right level of reserves is, and each treasurer will give his own or her own technical advice. That section 8 makes clear my advice is unequivocal. General reserves are at the lowest I would ever allow given the size of the authority. They are proportionately very, very low, but I tolerate those, as I mentioned earlier, because our specific reserves are relatively large and our cash holdings are relatively large. But don't rub your hands too much in glee. We do have some large capital aspirations and some deferred borrowing to get through. So there is rhyme and reason in my certification as to why the reserves are what they need to be, and that I am satisfied, if you are minded ultimately to pass a budget tonight, which you legally have to effectively, that you are in a position where the reserves are adequate for anything that I foresee in 24-25. There are concerns in future years, as has been discussed elsewhere on the agenda. 71 and 72 and 73 go through the earmarked reserve assumptions and ultimately concludes with my advice in 8.17, which I am legally obligated to do, to consider, do I consider them adequate in the circumstances of what I know and what I don't know? And my advice unequivocally is they do and are, and that would conclude my technical advice on the budget. But I'm conscious that you have a whole process to go through in terms of maybe some questions on me on the technical presentation, but then the series of amendments to go through. As I say, at the very, very end, if it would assist members, but only if they wish to direct me to do so, I could summate those technical adjustments I've had to refer to as a result of the late adjustments that have come through from Welsh Government so far. Thank you, Presiding Member.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any technical questions, Mr. Smith, please? No. Okay, we'll call on Councillor Rob Stewart then to propose, and Councillor
Yep,
Andrew.
Chair, nothing to add. Happy to move the report.
Thank you. Right, move on to the uplands one now. It's been seconded. Yeah, it's been seconded, yeah.
Happy to second, Presiding
Thank
Member.
you. Okay.
Can I give notice, Presiding Member, of an amendment? Notice of an amendment.
Okay, thank you. The first amendment, sorry, the first amendment we got is from the Uplands group, so can I understand this is going to be moved by Mr. Councillor Rice? Sorry, call me Mr. Sorry.
Thank you, Presiding Member. But the amendment that's suggested here is quite a simple and straightforward amendment. Following the announcement of the additional £1.1 million coming from the Welsh Government to the Council, we fully support as a group the idea of using £400,000 of that money towards the bus travel proposals. However, in terms of the remaining 0.7 million, we don't believe it should be allocated to the Education ICT reserve, because in the sense that is a reserve. And we believe that instead it should be put into the base budget as an additional 0.7 million to form a highways patch team, which I know has now been renamed. The reason for that amendment is that that money is in a base budget and will continue for years going forward, and there has to be a decision to take it out if you see to do so in the future, unlike an additional capital one-off additional amount into a budget. Okay, so why do we think the patch team, or as it's going to be called in the future, its new name, is important? Well, because that is money which is spent under the direction and with the influence of local members and people who understand the local area and the area that they want to prioritise in terms of the team's work. We believe that this is a fully justifiable amendment. And if you wanted to compare and pick up what the leader was saying earlier, we're not taking money away from the Education Department. In essence, if you look at all of our amendments put together, we're putting in £1.5 million more into education than the Labour group is suggesting. And also, in terms of our later amendments, the money is now and not about being kept for the future. So I think there's quite a difference in the approach there. And I would just suggest that members consider this as an amendment. And I move it, and I believe I'll be seconded by colleagues as well.
Is there a seconder, please?
I'll second the amendment.
Yeah, Chair, I'll repeat some of the comments I made earlier in that this is an education reserve, and just for further clarity for members, the reserve that Mr Smith referred to earlier is the ICT reserve. So we deployed £7 million, the entire reserve, into schools this year to assist them with this year's pressure. Now, when I attended the scrutiny meeting, scrutiny did raise the point about how that reserve would be replenished, and the fact that this reserve was there to help reinstate or renew, IT for schools in future years. So it is prudent that when additional money turned up late, that we began that process of helping schools to prepare for future pressures. That is why £0.7 million has gone into the reserve this year to help for next year potentially, and to begin trying to push that cliff edge further out, but also to help schools prepare for their IT renewal, which they will still need to deal with in future years. So on that basis, and for the fact that we have our own amendment, which is proposing £3 million into helping all of our services that do potholes, patch, and others, that we see this amendment as ill thought out. We do not believe in taking money off education for other departments. Education has been and remains our top priority within this authority, and we do not want to see children or others go without whilst money is spent elsewhere.
Can I call on Mr Smith, please, to provide a technical view and an opinion? Thank you.
So, Presiding Member, I am satisfied the amendment technically holds water, and that's why it is in front of you for decision and debate. The only thing that does concern me, which the leader has referred to, is that it was an unusual device to propose to draw the whole of the school's ICT reserve in the first instance, and there does need ultimately to be a repayment mechanism, because whilst I accept the comments made that it is a future liability, it is a liability that we signed up to as a condition of the grant terms, and so it is slightly more prudent to put some of the money back into the pot. But equally, I took a view in terms of weighing the amendment for discussion and debate today. It was the administration's proposal to take the whole of the pot for understandable reasons, because we talked about it earlier in terms of what we're euphemistically referring to as the cliff edge for schools, but it's really about slowing the impact on schools. So technically, the amendment is legitimate. It doesn't therefore then provide for topping back up that reserve, which does need to be topped up at some point, but that doesn't have to be decided today. So members are free to weigh the merits of the arguments made by members in the chamber.
Thank you, Mr Smith. I'll now open it for debate. So can I call on the group leaders first? Councillor Holly, you speak.
Could I ask a technical question first?
Yeah.
I'd like to ask the legal officer whether it's appropriate for Councillor May to second this amendment, given his particular personal interest in directing the road repair teams. Is there not a danger that he has a direct interest in this, as providing himself with personal photographic opportunities?
Who's responding? Holly.
Yeah, thank you, Presiding Member. This amendment, I'm afraid we cannot support, because we do not feel that taking money out of the IT budget for schools is appropriate at this time.
Anybody else wish to ask questions? No? Okay. Can I go to a vote then, please? So it's been seconded and moved. So can I have a show of hands in support of the amendment? Anybody against? Any abstentions? Okay, that's fallen then. Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to the next amendment, and it comes from the Lib Dems, and I believe it's Councillor Holly.
Thank you, Presiding Member. I'm glad we got there in the end. Obviously, we are here today to discuss probably one of the most important things that council does, and that's set its council tax. We get our money from Westminster, then from Cardiff, and then we in this chamber are in a position to set a figure that then goes to is raised through the public. And it's that figure that I think we need to think about. And I think it's that figure of what we currently doing is 5.9 we need to look at. We have an equalisation fund. Now, many people in this chamber who have been recently elected are not aware that that equalisation fund has been around a long time. But I have to say that it was only in 2015, 2016, we've seen its rapid increase into the figures it's got now. And that is because we borrowed the amount of money that we have. And the revenue that we were supposed to be paying on that particular borrowing. And because we did not spend that money, we did not have to put that money in the revenue account. We took it out and we then put it into this reserve or fund. So what we're suggesting is that we take some of that out. And we take it out for two reasons. The first reason is the public in Swansea, the people who elect us in Swansea, are having a particularly rough time. We've heard about energy prices, we've heard about other increases. And I believe, and we all believe, and I think many of you should start believing, that as a council we should actually not take more money off them. Take as least as possible when we are the richest, cash richest authority in Wales. Now, we are told many times that we are a member-led authority. We have the opportunity now of being a member-led authority. We've heard the technical advice of the officer, and you've heard him saying earlier on that we are cash rich. You've also heard that we have massive amount of funds and he is being prudent with it. Yes, he is being prudent with it, but we need to have the conscience. We need to have the understanding that the people that elect us have the right for us to have a conscience as well, to take a stance and use some of that money to cut down on the council tax. The other part of our suggestion in the amendment is that we start looking at freezing car parking charges. And we also look to help our city centre. Now, it's all well and good building new buildings. It's all well and good having the Palace Theatre done up and the Albert Hall. Great, wonderful. But we rely on people coming to the city centre to shop, go in our market, which is the best market, arguably in the UK, but it is the best market. So the people to go in there, we are suggesting that from Monday to Thursday, between 10 and 3 o'clock, that we have free parking. Other cities and other towns have done that, and it has been successful. It is ironic, really. We had a wonderful presentation from the leader, and it's probably a bit more cut in this time than it's been many times. No photos of myself or Wendy, but he did have one of Jeff and Peter and Stuart and Alan. And fair enough, you know, we've got to be a bit robust to sit in this chamber and take the sit. But I have to say that, you know, and to accuse me of, and the administration I was fortunate to lead, to actually rob, if you like, the council of £70 million, I think is a bit far-fetched. And the reason I say it's far-fetched, because our leader, Bob the Bandit, has taken out £32 million. He's taken £32 million out of our revenue account. He didn't stop getting it. He just went along and said, I'm taking it out and putting it in a fund. To hoodwink the public into thinking the city deal didn't cost a lot because we've got this money to put in. He's feverishly right there now, because he knows he's right. He's taken that money out of the revenue account that could have gone to social services, it could have gone to education, it could have even done the roads. But oh no, put it in my back pocket. I will then turn round and say to the public, look how good I've been. I've kept the council tax down. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that, meaning that he had it himself. He put it in the back of Mr. Smith's back pocket. Yeah, it's there. It's cash, and I think we should be using it. The reality is that the public of Swansea are suffering, and we should do a little bit that we can to help them by cutting this council tax. I know you're going to say, oh, well, we'll have to get it back at some stage and whatnot, but that has always been the case. But we don't know, and the leader has pointed out the fact that we could be have a triple whammy. We could have a Labour government in Westminster. We could have a Labour administration in Cardiff, and a Labour administration here, and we could be in the land of milk and honey. We don't know. I suspect not, because I think in the long term, this country has to pay back for the disasters that have happened since trust and what have you. But I think we should do something here, a very simple, a very easy thing for us to do. And I think as a member-led authority, the members in this chamber should now take a decision and vote for this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for your motion, please? Okay. Okay. I'll call on the leader to respond. You come last. Smith, do you want to make any comments?
Thank you, presiding member. I would just briefly say in previous years, you're aware that I have strongly advised directly against making any decision that has a future implication. I thought very long and hard about it in terms of discussing the amendments with the leader of the opposition, and I am content as worded, which does recognise that everything else being equal, it would merely be a deferral. And at the moment, it would mean being added on in the following year. It is very clear what the option would be. I do recognise the cost of living pressures that fall on everyone, but I would remind it is one of the lowest council taxes already proposed in Wales, and there is a danger that if you go low, eventually you're forced to go high. But I am perfectly content as worded, it appropriately strikes the balance, and as the leader of the opposition has said, gives an opportunity for members to weigh the need to protect services with weighing the cost that undoubtedly the public are having to deal with. But for the avoidance of doubt, there is no free money. It is merely a deferral. But I was satisfied as technically worded, it could stand. In previous years, I've been much fussier about it, but I was swayed ultimately to allow it on the basis as worded for deliberation and debate in the chamber. Thank you, presiding member.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I now open the debate. I got the first speaker is Councillor Rice, please.
Thank you, presiding member. I definitely think the amendment has merit and there are some good parts to it. I'm always attracted to one of Chris Holly's amendments when it comes to car parking, because last year I remember he also put forward a very good and sound amendment about car parking, but the Labour group moved ahead still with their car parking proposals. And I think one thing that comes to mind is a programme from a few years ago. I think it's called Thick of It. And there was a fictional character played by Peter Capaldi. And the only way you can describe Labour's approach to car parking last year, and all of the things happened subsequently to April, is an omnishambles. So I'd be very keen to try and have a look at supporting the car parking proposals to revive the city.
Councillor Rice. Councillor Phillips.
Chairman, I wonder whether the leader of the opposition could explain to us. He talks about taking the money out, the 1.69 million, and to be funded from a one-off draw from the Capital Equalisation Reserve. The Section 151 officer advises the reduction would need to be fully reinstated and caught up the following year, all things being equal, recognising the following year's budget will be subject to further discussion. Could the leader of the opposition explain what happens if we do this and all things are not equal?
Councillor Holly, do you want to respond?
I'd be very surprised if they weren't. That's the first thing. I suspect that with the funds that we have within the Capital Equalisation Fund, there would be sufficient funds in there to make sure everything is equal. I think actually picking up that particular word, that actually means that we don't know what's going to happen with the elections in both in London, and as such we have to put that word in to make sure we cover everything, and that's why it's in there.
Then, Chairman. So the Liberal Democrats are proposing an amendment which will have an effect in the future on the basis that this leader of the opposition's already admitted when he doesn't actually know what's going to happen.
That's not so. You know that, Councillor Phillips. What we are saying is, depending on what happens next year, should we put it back in, or can we use it again as another method of reduction, or for some other purpose in equalisation?
Thank you. Leader?
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Phillips is absolutely right, and this is why you know it's impossible to support this amendment. It's a number of reasons. I touched upon earlier the fact that there were bad decisions made by the administration back in 2011 and 12, which was right before the election. It was an election gimmick that didn't work, but it has left a lasting legacy, which has meant that council resources are lower, significantly lower than they otherwise would be. Now, this one seeks to do the same thing, and you know, I think Mr. Smith's wording or advice on this one is a great bit of Sir Humphrey. But basically, what he's telling the leader of the opposition is, you don't know what is coming next year. It may be worse than it is this year, but you have to reverse what you're doing this year and put it in next year if you're to do this at all. That's the frank language that's being said here. So essentially, what we're creating is a Lib Dem levy that will be put on the people of Swansea next year, regardless of whether energy costs have gone up next year, regardless of whether council funding has gone down next year. 2% will be needed next year, because you're not raising the 1% this year. That's what that language says. Mr. Smith may want to clarify, but that's the way I read his words. I think he's done it politely, but that's what he's saying. So we are already, as has been said, the fourth lowest council tax in Wales. We have already taken into account in terms of our deliberations the cost of living pressures and tried to come to a balance. And remember, the 5.99 includes 1% for the fire levy, and then it includes an additional 1% for social care. That 1% is already being allocated into prevention services, into the employability services, into a number of services that require sustained investment over a number of years, not a chance that you're going to replace it next year, because come the end of the year, if it was one-off funding, then you're in the same position as you are with grants, with people worrying for their jobs and then potentially not having funding the following year. I've taken advice from Dave Howes, from Amy Hawkins, from the cabinet members with respective responsibilities. And that is why the Labour group decided to increase to 5.99% to make sure that we gave the services that certainty. This is kicking the can down the road, not knowing what the future looks like. They did that when they were in power, and they cost us over £70 million. So this is not a sensible proposal. In addition to that, the parking proposal is even more crazy. We have one of the lowest parking regimes in the UK currently. It is a very simple, understandable offer, a 54321 offer. It was worked up in conjunction with BID and with the businesses in the city centre. It is their preferred scheme. Councillor Holly comes along and says, I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to confuse the hell out of everybody. We're going to put in a different regime to cut across the current offer, only in car parks with no rationale for why those 3 parks, where people turn up at other times of days and then will have to pay. I'm not sure even it's technically possible with the machines. And I don't think it'll have the support of the businesses in the city centre. I don't know whether he engaged with them to come up with this offer, but certainly what we currently have is what the businesses worked up with us. So I would suggest, for all of the reasons I've outlaid, that we do not support this amendment, as well-meaning as it is.
Just clarifying something. Okay. Any more questions? Oh, sorry, Peter, Councillor Babb.
Thank you, Chair. It isn't a question, just a response to what Councillor Stewart has just said, because if the Liberal Democrats are guilty of having £70 million knocked off the money which might be available to the council today, then he and the Labour group are complicit in that because they failed to vote against that. If they really felt so strong, they should have voted against that 0% council tax increase, but they didn't because it was an election year. The same reason we put it on 0%, because it was an election year. So, you know, this isn't just us, it is you as well in terms of this. And let us not forget, as Councillor Holly says, that the actual levy here, the Labour levy, is £32 million, which has been taken out of the revenue budget and put into a reserve instead of being used to spend on services, instead of being used to lessen the burden on the people of Swansea. And as I said, let us not forget that this money we're talking about, it isn't money which we have. This money belongs to the people of Swansea. This is money we're levying on them. We're talking about all these figures here, about millions of pounds here and millions of pounds there. But at the end of the day, people out there who are struggling to pay their mortgages, struggling to pay their energy bills, struggling to feed themselves in some instances, are having to pay the bill for whatever we pass today. And what we're saying is that we understand that we're under very difficult circumstances, and we'd like to keep that bill as small as possible, and at 4.99% is possibly the lowest we can go. So let's go that low. Thank you, Chair.
Respond, Leader. No. Okay. Oh, sorry. Chris.
Thank you. Thank the leader for his reply. It always strikes me as if we've got to go back to 2012, 2011. He keeps on about the interest rates and what have you. As I said before, you know, Napoleon didn't want good generals, he wanted lucky ones, and the leader has been in a fortunate position to have been in a position where we had these low interest rates. And I won't say why, but but anyway, we've had these low interest rates, we've had this huge amount of money. All we are saying to the leader, I'm saying to the Labour group, you should think about the people that put you into office. You should think about the fact that they are suffering. We've got food banks, we've got real problems. You talked about the hub, the Mawr Hub, which is being run by a charity. You know, this is a sad state of affairs. We're one of the richest countries in the world, and we are in this position. And I think, you know, if we can do a little bit to help people, we should. And I think by this reduction, we could. To harp on about the fact that we may have to pay it back next year and what have you. As I say, let's be blunt about it. We don't know what's going to happen next year. We could have a massive increase because there could be another parliament, or the equalisation fund could grow exponentially because we are not paying out of our capital. Remember, the best that we've managed to spend is 70%. So the money that we've set aside to pay that, what's left of that, it goes back into the fund. And it's now up to 20 odd million pounds. You know, and that's what we've got to think about. That money has come out of that revenue budget that could be paying for services. All we're asking you to do is put it back in. Thank you.
Chair, if I may, just I did ask Mr. Smith a technical question, and it was along the lines of the motion is very clear, which is the Section 151 officer advises the reduction would need to be fully reinstated and caught up in the following year. Now, Councillor Holly said may. Mr. Smith is saying must. So again, I'd like clarification off Mr. Smith, please.
Mr. Smith, please, can you clarify?
Apologies, presiding member. Yes, my wording is very deliberate. I do not know what is coming, but what could be coming is not particularly pleasant in terms of the planning assumptions that you've agreed in the first item. And the only basis on which I could have allowed it to technically stand as was to give the strictest advice, which is I would expect everything else being equal, it would need to be loaded directly on as an additional levy onto council tax next year. I accept that may or may not come to pass, but I have chosen my wording very, very carefully to maximise the opportunity for debate in this council chamber. But if it goes lower than what has been proposed at the moment, everything else being equal, I would expect it to be fully caught up the following year. And that is the reason why I've given the advice in the amendment as worded. I hope that clarifies the position that the leader was looking for in terms of technical advice to members.
You're quite, I understand. I think everybody understands what you just said, Mr. Smith, and we accept that. But the equalisation fund will be as large again, if not larger next year. So, you know, the reality is there's always going to be money available. Can I move the amendment, presiding member? I think it's important that we get on with this council meeting.
We had a seconder. Councillor Fitzgerald, did you second it? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to move to the vote then, please. And can I have all those in favour of the amendment? Just watching online for a minute. Okay, anybody against? Any abstentions? Okay, that has fallen then. So we go back to the original debate. So any questions?
Chair, nothing further to add. Again, the report has been moved and seconded, so.
Okay, so we go back to there's two recommendations, but I believe Mr. Smith, do you want to come in with?
So it was just to
technical
remind.
Advice?
So it was just to remind members that now we are back to the substantive motion. I do not think I need to present on screen all of the technical adjustments that I gave you advice on. I think I was very clear in what the three changes were that are be able to be adequately captured, and that £1,000 worth of rounding. So subject to the technical advice I've already given around those three specific grant transfers, which have amended the substantive motion, and the £1,000 on the estimate on revenue support grant, which also amended it, that you are being asked to vote on that. As I say, I'll be guided by members if anyone feels they need to see on screen all of those sets of numbers that have changed, but I think they are a relatively small and understandable set for you to have understood the advice I've given in the words, but I will be guided by the chamber.
On a point of order, Chair, can we have them on screen, because it is quite confusing just listening verbally. Thank you.
It's possible to have them on screen, Mr. Smith, please.
I will endeavour to crank up the difference engine as we are speaking and present it now. So do let me know if that has appeared.
Can you see it, everybody? Yeah.
So if I may, presiding member, my main reason for not wanting to otherwise put it up was obviously, I mean, I'm only changing numbers, and this part of the report is in the medium of English, but I've highlighted in red where I have changed the number and what the consequential is. So as I indicated, a £40,000 specific grants transfer for social services. So the cash limit for social services goes up £40,000. The two specific grant transfers in relation to flood management of £225,000 and child burials at £67,000, making a £292,000 specific grant transfer. So that goes in, and that figure is increased in red by £292,000. That increases, as a substantive motion, the overall directorate expenditure by £332,000. If I go down towards the bottom of the report, you will see that I have sneaked in my £1,000 due to my rounding error estimate on earmarked reserves for the revenue support grant uplift. And then that brings the overall cash limit down from £332,000 increase to £331,000. The budget has to technically balance, and the reason it balances is we, in our final settlement between provisional and final, got precisely £331,000 more. So I have given effect to that item. It means all of those numbers in red and black on the screen have been changed, but the substantive motion, because it's a £1,000 rounding error, and then three specific grant transfers which are entirely neutral and equalised out by the change in block grant, result in absolutely no changes to the proposed overall financing for the authority and the overall proposed council tax, which you'll be taking into account if you are minded to pass this motion when you come to the statutory resolution in due course. So I will pause for a moment, but then otherwise take my screen down if members are satisfied that that visual presentation does assist them with working out the technical amendments I've given advice to. Thank you, presiding member.
Mr Smith. Everybody clear on that now before I go to the vote? Okay, there are two recommendations. I'm going to take them both together if that's okay. And it's that the council approves the revenue budget for 24-25 as detailed in Appendix A, subject to the technical amendments by the 151 officer. And the second is the council approves a budget requirement and council tax levy for 24-25 as detailed in section 9 of this report. So can I have a show of hands in support of the motion, please? Okay, anybody against? Any abstentions? Okay, that's carried. It's now gone 7 o'clock, so I'm going to call a 10-minute break. Is that 10 minutes okay? Okay, thank you. Okay, everybody, if you start taking your seats, please. Oh.
Amendments on the next one, isn't there? This the next lot of
Yes,
amendments are on
next
11.
one.
I think.
Okay, can we take your seats, please? Chief Exec. Okay, before I proceed, Deb Smith wants to make an announcement, please.
Yes, just a reminder, everybody, if you're declaring an interest tonight, can you please fill out the form and can you put your hand up at, well, now, Gareth, is it so you can deliver the forms out?
Okay, everybody had your forms? Okay, we'll move on then, and we're on to item 10, and that's the housing revenue account, the HRA revenue and budget 24-25, and I believe Councillor Lewis is giving us.
Thank you, Presiding Member. I don't intend on taking too long over this report. Members have had it in advance, but there are a few things that I would like to highlight. So if I could draw members' attention to item 2 on the report, which is the projected revenue outturn for 23-24. Firstly, rent arrears have been very closely monitored, and this has been provided for in terms of bad debt provision in the budget and is anticipated to be sufficient, but we're keeping a close eye on that, and we're also giving some support to our tenants if they do fall into rent arrears to make sure that they're not significant and that we catch things early with the rent team. So they're doing an excellent job. In fact, probably a good time for me to pay tribute not just to our housing officers, but also our partners in terms of the frontline support that they give through what has been a very challenging year with our homelessness numbers, particularly going to a staggering over 8,000 people on our register at the moment. So difficult times, but the teams have really pulled together. Also, the revenue repairs spend has been monitored, and it's forecast that there will be a planned overspend of £1.9 million for day-to-day repairs. It's described, Presiding Member, as an overspend in the report, but you could actually look at it as an increased investment in making sure that our council tenants have sufficiently, really good quality homes and tackling any repairs that they need to have carried out. We've also been very proactive. So if a member of the building services team go out to do repair and they see something else, not do they only report it, but they try and carry out that repair during that visit as well. But that has resulted in an increase in our repairs. The other things are building inflation and the backlog due to COVID. So that has resulted in an overspend of £2 million. But we have got a new contractors framework. So we've got more people on the books to be able to carry out those repairs in good time. And there's also another planned overspend of £760,000 for the additional electrical repairs, mainly from the renting homes legislation. We need to carry out electrical testing more frequently, which of course has resulted in a higher spend. And the other thing is, just to highlight that the above anticipated overspends will be offset by a reduction in the revenue contribution to the capital transfer of £12 million and a reduction in borrowing costs accordingly of just over £0.6 million as a result of the slippage of the capital programme, which we'll come on to in the report at item 12. I won't go into too great detail, but I do want to highlight 4.2. Inflation has had an impact on this budget in terms of the cost of materials, which have gone up, and also we've seen an increase naturally in staffing increases. And just to point out finally that our reserves at 0.6 are very high compared to what we would normally do, but that is a result of the capital programme slippage. So they stand at £13.9 million, but the proposal is that we will draw 4.9 million from reserves to fund the capital expenditure in 24-25. So the reserves are detailed in Table B. So with that, I'm happy to move the report, presiding member, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Chair, happy to formally second.
Apologies, Mr. Smith. I should have called you in as well. So would you like to come in now, please?
No, that's absolutely fine, presiding member. You were very prescient because it is a self-contained ring-fenced account. I would have needed to say very, very little, so I took no offence at the oversight whatsoever. I think you were very prescient, presiding member. No technical advice from me needed on this one.
Councillor Black.
The technical question, please. What would Mr. Smith think was an acceptable level of reserves for the housing revenue account? What's the minimum?
That's an interesting question. If you put me on the spot, most treasurers like to see reserves between 3 and 5% for both general fund and HRA, but the HRA has higher reserves because it is more ring-fenced and specialist compared to the sheer number of specific grants held. There is no hard and fast rule. The bigger the capital programme, the bigger the risks, the higher the reserves are likely to be. So that's the sort of advice I'd give on both of them, Councillor Black.
Okay, thank you. Just interested.
Any questions for the cabinet member? No. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. So we're going to go to the vote. And the recommendation is that the revenue budget proposal is as dated in section 4 be approved. So can I have a show of hands in support of the report? Anyone against? Anyone, any exception? Abstentions? It's getting late, sorry. Okay, that's carried. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. We now move on to item 11, and that's the capital budget programme for 23-24. Sorry?
Sorry, everybody. Councillor Hale, this is an item you declared a personal and prejudicial interest in, so you need to leave the meeting for this item. I shall call you back in via Teams when the item's over. Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Chairman, my apologies. I missed this when I read this before. I'm referring to page 128, paragraph 1.8, which talks about the City and Waterfront Digital District, which is in development with UWTSD. I am a student of that institution as well as a co-funder of some award that is being done there in regards to my late wife. I wondered, have I got the declarable interest or is it just a personal interest?
That's fine. If you fill in the declaration form, that's fine. Thank you. It's personal interest only.
So we'll move to item 11, and that's the capital budget Oh, sorry, I can't see. Yes. Sorry, Councillor Evans, Councillor Mandy Evans. You're on mute, Councillor Evans.
Hand up.
Do you wish to speak, Mand?
No, thank you. I put my hand up to vote. I haven't taken it down. If I'm sorry, Jan, I apologise.
Okay, no problem. Okay, we move on then to item 11, and that's the capital budget programme, and two amendments have been received. So we go to the amendments first, and the first amendment is from the Labour Group. Over to you, Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. I won't say much more than I said in my presentation, but to remind members, the amendment is as follows. To make a one-off draw of £1 million from the Capital Equalisation Reserve and to use the existing £2 million allocated from the insurance reserve, but to bring that forward to create an additional total spend, extra spend of £3 million for investment in highways related works for the coming year. So all 3 million would be deployed in the coming year. To draw 1 million one-off from the Capital Equalisation Reserve to support the delivery of additional community priorities. The scheme would provide additional resources for councillors to support bigger community priorities within their wards, and that would be similar to the scheme that we ran a few years ago. And then finally, to draw £1 million one-off from the Capital Equalisation Reserve to begin the process of upgrading changing room facilities across the county to ensure they can be used by girls as well as boys. And Chair, just to say, whilst I have received a number of names this evening, all of which I disagree with, from a Napoleon General to some sort of builder or banker, I'm not sure what it was. All I would say is, look, we set up the Capital Equalisation Reserve for the specific purposes of ensuring that the significant investment we are making through our capital programmes in both schools and in major projects across the city for economic development, jobs and other opportunities for the people of Swansea, it means that that Capital Equalisation Reserve is there as a cushion so that it does not require additional council tax to be raised from the members of the public. That is the main aim of the Capital Equalisation Reserve. It is not about redirecting money away from services. It is about ensuring that the burden does not fall directly on the taxpayer. And I think Mr. Smith had managed that to run until 2030, but obviously we're in a position at the moment where the reserve is being drawn, but the intention, which Mr. Smith has alluded to, is that that would need inevitably be retopped up in future years were we to continue to maintain that obligation. So again, I think the three very important one-off draws, and they allow us to do some important things in communities which are priorities. And all I would say on the first one as well, if you've taken the time to look at the feedback from the budget consultation, further investment in highways was the #1 response from members of the public. So we are responding directly to that consultation. Thank you, Chair.
Apologies again, Mr. Smith. I should have called you in. If you've got any technical advice, please.
No problem at all, presiding member. You've probably bored of my dulcet tones, so that's totally understandable. For both the capital report, I mean, the salient points have been drawn out, which is it is a large capital programme. It is a multi-year capital programme. Some flexibility between the years is allowable, as is some flexibility for one-off draws from the Capital Equalisation Reserve, as long as they are, as the leader has alluded to, topped up in due course, and as well as for this amendment that the leader has presented when it comes to the next amendment too. I am satisfied that because they are all talking about changes to the timing or allocation of individual pots of money one-off, but in the broad spectrum of a 4 or 5 year capital programme, they are all in order. So I do not need to give any technical advice on any of the other amendments unless I'm specifically asked to do so. I am content to end my technical advice on that and the amendments at this point. Thank you, presiding member.
Any technical questions for Mr. Smith first?
Thank you, presiding member. Just to formally second the report.
Any technical questions? Yeah. Is it a technical question first? Yeah. Okay, Councillor Rice.
A technical question for the 151 officer. My understanding is that the insurance reserve has been drawn down in this particular amendment by £2 million. I was under the impression that the insurance reserve was at the level that you recommended and it shouldn't come down.
So perhaps on that one, by way of clarification, the wording that the leader has chosen and used is to accelerate forward an existing agreed draw from the insurance reserve. There was a report to Cabinet and/or Council previously, which did accelerate some spending on highways. So it is an existing draw from reserves that has already been agreed by me to get it to the lowest level that I'm satisfied for the insurance reserve, and it is accelerating that forward, so it doesn't in itself draw any more from the insurance reserve than was already planned. That's the important distinction on that one, whereas the 3 proposed draws from capital equalisation reserve are new, but I am satisfied that they are affordable given the amounts that are in the capital equalisation reserve. So apologies if I hadn't made that clear in any advice I've given previously, Councillor Rice.
Councillor Black.
Thank you, Chair. I actually have a question for the leader on this amendment, because I think this is the second year that we've done this, where you've moved an amendment to add money into highways to carry out road repairs. I think we roughly have around about £70 million backlog in terms of road resurfacing and repairs. So the question I want to know is, why don't you actually build this into the budget? It's 7 million last year, 8.4 million this year. Why isn't this built into the capital programme as per right, rather than having to do these amendments every year to top the amount of money up? Because it does seem to me that we borrowed, £200 million for the city deal and various other things, and we're not borrowing anything like that to try and fix the road problems in this city.
Simple answer. I think firstly, I think you were right. There is a £70 million backlog in roads, and there's a £70 million loss of income to the council due to the decision years ago. It's a really balancing number, that is. But to be more serious in terms of your question, the reality is at the present time, there isn't a commitment in any government plans for capital to be renewed every year. So the budget isn't there. So what we are doing is obviously we are lobbying Welsh Government and UK Government for more capital to come. If that capital comes, that reduces the pressure on the local capital funds to fund. So what we're doing is waiting to see what we get from those governments, and then if we need to add more in, we're adding it. So it's a process of doing that. If, of course, we did that and the money didn't turn up, all it does is create a new pressure that we then have to fix.
So basically, you're waiting for supported borrowing to be...
No, we're waiting for more capital to arrive from UK and Welsh Government. As you'll know, this year, Councillor Black, we had £66,000 extra in capital.
Yeah, I know that, yeah, okay.
Councillor Rice, did you want to come back in?
It's just speaking in relation to the Labour's proposed amendments. The first question that always springs to mind when I look at an amendment by the administration group is, okay, fine, amendments are good if there's been a change in circumstances. I don't believe there's been a big financial change in circumstances between the Cabinet papers, the consultation period, and now. It just feels like a different device to engage in what I call the new splash economics that the leader seems to like to do. He likes to change and amend and bring in new big things to splash on the day of the or day before of the council. I mean, if you're in control of the council, you know these things months ago. Why don't you decide to do these things months ago? And I mean, I'd love to hear an explanation for that. The ideas got merit. They are good ideas, but why didn't you decide to do them months ago when nothing's changed?
I think perhaps Councillor Rice has been asleep for the last 7 days. In the last 7 days, we've had the Welsh Government's final budget, and today, just a few hours ago, we had the UK Government budget. And as Mr Smith has demonstrated, whilst not a lot changed, some things did change because he's had to update his papers. One of the things that we chose to do in terms of the amendment was to try and wait and see at the longest possible time to see what new money turned up. Now, we were hopeful, as I'm sure everybody else in this chamber was, that the Tories in London today would have invested in services, would have made more capital available, would have pushed more money into Wales. That doesn't appear to have happened. So therefore, we go through with the amendment. If, of course, Mr Hunt had stood up today and there was an extra 100 million or so in capital for Wales, we'd have obviously looked to trail the fact that we'd have put more money in over and above the amendment that we have here. So the reality is, Councillor Rice, we were waiting to see what both the Welsh Government were able to do and the UK Government with their final budgets. And, I'm sure Mr Smith will say the same. We have been in a very unstable situation this year, given that it's an election year. We've got the election of a new First Minister. There are no spending plans from either government for the next 3 years. So it's almost impossible to plan in the way that you would like. I would like the certainty of a 3-year spending plan, so I know what I'm planning for this council in the next 3 years. That does not exist at the moment. So we're doing the best we can with the limited information we have.
Mr Smith, do you wish to make any comments?
No, I don't. On this one, presiding member, I'm satisfied that I don't need to give any further comment on this item.
Thank you, Mr Smith. Sorry, Councillor Phillips, I didn't see it.
Just a point of clarification, Chairman. Perhaps Councillor Rice misspoke when he described us as the administration group. I, for one, who was a councillor when the administration group were in charge of the council, wouldn't like to be confused with them. But just so that we're clear for the records going forward, this is the Labour group, not our predecessors, the administration group, which were comprised of Conservatives, Liberal Democrats and Independents.
Okay, if nobody else wishes to ask any questions, I'm going to move to the vote. So can I have all those in favour of the amendment, show of hands, please? Any against? Any abstentions? Okay, that amendment is carried. The second amendment is from the Uplands Group. I understand it's going to be Councillor Rice.
Thank you, presiding member. It's quite a straightforward amendment proposed here. What's proposed is to remove all future expenditure on Skyline, which is 4.1 million, and to remove the Swansea Vale car park facility of 3.1 million, which is semi-related to the two items. And then that would be to reinvest the saved 7.2 million into additional 5 million of carriageway resurfacing and a school energy efficiency and air quality fund of 2.2 million. So just to pick up on the points of why would we change between those two things? Well, the number one priority, as identified already by the leader today in feedback, was to improve and invest in the city's roads and carriageways. And we believe that this is a priority which is much more in line with what the public want than spending money or forwarding money to Skyline, to a private enterprise, to do something which isn't wholly popular across the city. If it was a business case, I would have thought it would be able to draw on its own funds. I have heard that it's a loan, and I've heard that there's money coming from grants. But as it stands, and I could be corrected by the Section 151 officer, for us to be able to spend the money now and to spend the money next year, that would involve unsupported borrowing for the short term, which would put the council at risk of any return funds. My concern is outlined really by one of the members of the public earlier, asked the same question about guarantees of repayment. I think it's probably worth the council having a look at some of the evidence that he suggested. I think it's worthy of more investigation, at least. So that aside, these two facilities, I don't think are as much a priority as dealing with school energy efficiency and being able to bring down the pressures and costs for schools in terms of energy going forward, and to help them going forward, and also air quality. Air quality is a major issue in a large number of schools across the UK and also potentially in Swansea. There are a number of ways which we could be dealt with, and I think this fund could be put available for ventilation, for greening areas where you don't have green fields. We do have a number of kind of island schools, as I'd call them, that have just tarmac, and that would be able to try and address some of these issues. And that goes back to a point that I made earlier, that there's 1.5 million extra under our proposals going to schools than under the Labour group's proposals. And I would just recommend that people consider this. This is probably what the general public wants, rather than maybe a project which we aren't guaranteed to see financial comeback from.
Ida, do you want to respond first? Okay.
I'll second the amendment.
Okay, Ida, sorry.
Yeah, Chair. Again, I think the intention of the motion is a noble one, I guess. I think the issue here is how they're proposing to redirect funds. Again, given that there is a live planning application in and that there are members of the planning committee, I'll be careful and limited in what I say. And obviously, we have a number of commercially confidential aspects to this, which is the same reason I was not able to give Mr. Houghton full answers in public session. But members will have had the opportunity of private briefings anyway on some of this. But essentially, the makeup of the deal to Skyline is that we would invest, as we do with many businesses in the city centre. We provide them with a loan which is fully repaid. We do that on lots of sites across the city centre where businesses are investing and growing. It's a normal practice we do day to day. So there's nothing new about the Skyline proposal. Obviously, the commercial safeguards around that will be ones that will be drawn up and have been drawn up by our finance and legal officers to make sure that we are going into that arrangement with proper safeguards for public money. But the key thing is here is Councillor Rice is right, it's a loan and it would be fully repaid. And after it's fully repaid, we would then be into positive territory in terms of a new income stream for the taxpayer, which would be an ongoing payment from Skyline and its operations. The other part of that, which would be concerning, because if you didn't go ahead with that, you would also then lose the Welsh Government's investment package, which would come to Swansea to support the Skyline scheme. So that would automatically be unwound as well in terms of the arrangements that the Welsh Government have with Skyline as a co-investment support. Added to that, Welsh Government's own business evaluation of this is that year one, we'd be looking at over 450,000 tourists coming to Swansea, rising to over 750,000 tourists. That is a multi-million-pound cash boost every year for the tourism industry in Swansea. It's a boost for hotels in Swansea. It's a boost for restaurants, for shops, for taxis. It will have a significant impact on our tourism and other economies in the city. Now, I know that Councillor Rice is an Uplands Party councillor, but he really has to think about the broader impacts of what he's saying on the rest of Swansea's economy. We cannot afford to be local parochial councillors in this chamber, and we should be thinking about the future of the whole economy of Swansea. And this motion would do nothing but harm our economic chances in terms of tourism, but also what those visitors would do for our city centre and for our local businesses. So it is a mad proposal in that respect. The money does not need to be removed from there. We have already agreed over £3 million, £3 million for carriageway and highways resurfacing. And again, should more money turn up at any point in this year from either government for the capital programme, then obviously highways would be a priority. Just in terms of the schools energy scheme, again, Councillor Rice may have missed it earlier. We are putting direct energy support in for schools again this year, multi-million-pound going in. And as Councillor Lewis has alluded to in previous exchanges, there is a retrofit and refit programme going on in schools already, which is undertaking some of what Councillor Rice is alluding to. Then the second part of the amendment is around removal of the Swansea Vale Park and Ride. Well, as I've said, we have a long-standing commitment as part of our climate change initiatives to create park and rides in the west and a larger park and ride in the east. That is to help people have the choice to get out of their cars and to get onto vehicles. We hope to be shortly running hydrogen buses in Swansea as part of a Welsh Government trial. We're waiting on formal confirmation of their final decision on that. And again, we will need these park and ride facilities if we're to engage in that really worthwhile pilot. So, if we're serious about climate change, we're serious about getting people out of cars and onto buses and public transport, then we need park and rides. Councillor Rice decides to completely do away with the park and ride. Not only would that cause further problems around the stadium, and I know councillors like Mike White and Bev Hopkins in Landor are constantly dealing with the issues of no travel plan being in place currently for the stadium, and their residents facing intolerant and indiscriminate parking. This is part of a broader plan about fixing that, making sure we've got proper park and ride facilities. So when those hundreds of thousands of tourists turn up, as well as the others who want to visit Swansea to watch first-class football and rugby, they have options to take park and ride when they do so. So for all of those reasons, I don't think this is a sensible amendment. It is very parochial. It doesn't look at the strategy, will harm our city, and I would ask that it's not supported.
I call on you, Councillor Holly. Can I call on Mr. Smith in case he's got any technical?
Yeah, I think I'd like to ask the leader well, two questions really. First of all, what's his view on the fact that the Ospreys possibly leave the stadium anyway? And I know as a supporter, he would have a view on that, and that would be part of this. But the other thing is, I understand the Swansea East AM isn't supportive of Skyline either, and he has a view that it's not really a sensible investment, or an investment that will regenerate parts of the Swansea East. And I wondered if you have a view on that as well.
Chair, it's not my amendment, so I'm not sure it's in order for me to answer questions, but I'll do my best. I think the first one, if the Ospreys wish to move to a new home, we will look to do what we can to support them. They have made public statements about leaving the stadium. I wouldn't want them to leave Swansea, so if we can find them a new home in Swansea, I'm sure we will put all of the efforts we possibly can to do that. In terms of the member of the Senedd, my understanding of the member of the Senedd's view, it's broader than Skyline. It's more around making sure that Welsh Government provides sufficient inward investment into university and to further education. It's not an anti-Skyline position, as I understand it. It's how the Welsh Government uses its money to support academia is the issue. But again, I won't want to speak for the member of the Senedd. I'm sure he can speak for himself.
Mr. Smith, did you wish to make any comments, please?
I will make just one briefly, presiding member. The amendment I allowed as technically worded for the reasons that Councillor Rice said, which was I took a view of only the short-term window. It was swapping money for money to the same value, and it was therefore legitimate for policy discussion and debate. Equally, the leader was quite right to point out that it is a loan expected to be repayable. I will tread equally carefully, given it's subject to commerciality and a whole raft of other things, but I viewed that to try and not consider the amendment for something that might happen in X number of years' time, it was reasonable for it to be debated. But I recognise both the points that Councillor Rice has made and the income stream points that the leader has made, and it becomes a straight policy choice on the basis of the arguments set out by those in the chamber. Thank you.
Councillor Lloyd. Lloyd.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question, a legal question for the Planning Committee. I want the legal advice on whether we ought to take part.
I would always advise caution in members of the Planning Committee becoming involved in a debate before when there's a live planning application. Of course, you can express a view as long as you're clear that that is not your final view and you haven't predetermined the matter. And there is, I would always advise members to, if they want to speak on a matter, to say that this is something that they will take into account, but there are other matters that they will similarly take into account when the matter comes before them as a planning application. You must always have an open mind to consider all matters when they come before you. But yeah, just a word of caution. If you want to speak today, you can, but you need to be clear that that you still have that open mind.
Yeah, could I just follow up on that question? Presumably that applies if you want to speak on this matter. In terms of voting, you're voting on a particular financial package which is unrelated to the planning application, so that should not really prejudice your decision in terms of a planning application. Is that correct?
That's what I was asking. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. That's what I meant. It was.
Is he?
That's what I'm trying to find out.
In terms of voting on this agenda item, yes, I would say yes, you can vote on this agenda item because you're looking at a different matter when it comes to the planning application. So yes, you have matters in front of you today, but you have them in front of you in a different capacity as a planning committee. So yes.
Presiding member, if I may come in and just echo, that's the advice of the monitoring officer. I'd have said the same. You are being asked today to consider matters around making provisional sums in the capital programme for things that might or might not come to pass, and it is sufficiently unrelated in my mind to endorse what the monitoring officer has said, because I think that goes to the heart of what Councillor Paul Lloyd was asking. I'm perfectly happy with that advice too.
Thank you, Mr Smith. Councillor Angela O'Connor, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question was for the leader, please. I'm happy to learn of your support for the park and rides. Are you saying that there are plans for, or are you in support of a park and ride for Swansea West, given the current lack of buses? I know many would be in support of this.
Again, Chair, it's not my motion and it's not question time, but I will give assurance to Councillor O'Connor. We have not ceased our search for a park and ride in the West. And if we can incorporate that in the plans for the International Sports Park that we're keen to deliver, then that would be a way of delivering it, we think.
Right,
Thank
Councillor
you.
Rice. Councillor Rice, do you wish to respond to anything? No?
No, that's fine. Presiding officer, I think I covered the points in my speech earlier.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded, so I'm going to go to the vote. So all those in favour of the amendment, can I have a show of hands, please? All those against? Any abstentions? Okay, that motion falls. So we now go back to the substantive motive. Councillor Stewart?
Nothing to add, Chair, just to move the report formally.
Councillor Evans, do you need anything to add to the recommendation before I read it?
No, so just to be, for everyone to be clear, the motion you are voting on now is the Labour amendment that is now the substantive motion. So that's outlined on the papers I've circulated earlier. So there's nothing to add to that.
And if that is agreed, can I have a show of hands in support of the motion, please? It has been voted and seconded.
Yeah, Chair, yeah, we're voting on the substantive amendment.
Many people
Sorry.
spoke at the same time. I don't know what anybody said.
Shall I come in here? The motion, the amendment was moved and seconded, and you voted on it, and that is now the amended motion. There is no need to second it and move it again.
Aren't we voting on the report as amended by the Labour amendment?
Yes.
Not the motion, it hasn't replaced the report, it's amended the report.
It has amended it, yes.
Just to be clear. Thank you.
Okay, so we're voting on the vote as it's been amended. So can I have a show of hands in favour of the report? All those against? Are you you're losing the will to live, Kraus? Okay, any abstentions, I want to know? Thank you. Okay, that motion has been carried then. Okay, thank you. Okay, can you call Joe back in, please?
Give me a moment.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Okay, now move to item 12, and that's the housing revenue account, the capital budget programme 23-24, 27-28. I need to call on Councillor Lewis. Oh, sorry. I think technical presentation first. No. It doesn't
Presiding
say.
member, if I may come in, technically it should be me giving advice on it, but I am happy that because of the ultra ring fence nature of the HRA account, I would not need to give any further advice beyond allowing Councillor Lewis to introduce the report, noting that there is an amendment on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Okay, over to you, Councillor Lewis. Sorry.
Thank you, Presiding Member, and thank you to Mr. Smith. Yes, just to highlight a few things of importance in this report. So it's important to point out that the in-year programme has been revised. So the current year will be 36 million as opposed to the original budget of 50.9 million, plus an additional more homes acquisitions of 1.6 million pounds and some other budget adjustments. But just to highlight the more homes acquisitions extra spend, that is something that we do have the flexibility to do. And it's fortunate that we are in a position to buy back council homes and private homes, if applicable, during the time when we lost 4,000 homes during the council right to buy scheme, and we absolutely desperately need to bring those back into house. The causes for some of the delays in the programme are outlined in 2.2, so I won't go over those. Sorry, there's conversation happening across the chamber, finding it difficult to concentrate. Thank you. So 2.3 will show the revised More Homes programme for 23-24, including that increased acquisitions budget. The background to the increased programme demands are set out in point 3 of the report, so I won't go into those in any great detail other than to say that Welsh Government have an ambition to deliver 20,000 affordable homes across Wales. And as a local response to that, the council are proposing to deliver 1,000 homes over a 10-year period. But that is in addition to the partners, housing associations, 106 agreements to bring further social housing and affordable homes across Swansea.